Just to introduce today, we are the fourth edition of the Science Policy Forum. And of course, the idea is to bridge cutting-edge research on biodiversity with policy on very important subjects. And today, it's transformative change and biodiversity. We will have different presentations framing this concept of transformative change, especially from the work on IPBES Transformative Change Assessment, but also different perspectives on the levers, governance, finances, linking also with the Nexus approach that was developed also through IPBES, and also looking into some aspect of social justice and potential trade-offs when thinking of transformation with biodiversity. Okay, so we have a nice menu. We'll have, of course, a break at some point. But we hope you can keep up with us. And I will also ask for your cooperation with questions. We have some question and answer sessions so that it's a bit more than just, like the descending type of format. Okay, I have spoken enough. I would like to now pass the floor to our host, Bruno Teixeira, President of the Directive Board of the FRCT. Please, Bruno.
It's working? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe many of you or all of you had lunch. Am I right? Yes. So it's okay. So let's start. So on behalf of the Regional Fund for Science and Technology, I would like to warmly welcome you to Azores and to this Science Policy Forum on Biodiversity Transformative Change. It's a really honor to have all of you here. I believe my friend Carolina told me you are more than 100 participants from more than 70 institutions from across Europe and behind. So let me go to the script because I have just 5 minutes. Bringing all these persons here together is very important for us. It reflects the importance of what we are discussing here today. How to move from the concept of transformative change to real implementation in support of biodiversity across all the Europe. Hosting this event is particularly meaningful for us, not only because it's important as a European level, but because of what it represents for us, as you know, a regional level, a small region, remote, but highly unique territory, deeply connected to nature. The Azores are a unique natural system, often described as a living laboratory. Our islands host ecosystems that are both highly valuable and also high vulnerability, okay? From deep sea environments to endemic terrestrial species found nowhere else on the world. At the same time, we face challenges that are central to the global biodiversity crisis, including climate change impacts, invasive species, and ecosystems vulnerability. This makes the Azores not only a place for observation, but also for developing, testing, and scaling solutions that are relevant behind our region. About our entity, a member, as many of you, of this partnership, FRCT is a public entity, part of the Azorean government, and our mission is to strengthen, to boost all the research, all the ecosystem of the Azores, putting together all the regional teams with European teams and developing our region. About this partnership, Biodiversa Plus, we as a regional funding entity, we actively fund and support regional research teams, enabling them to participate in international consortia and positioning them as key actors, finding regional realities with European agendas. In doing so, we are reinforcing the capacity of the Azores to respond to environmental challenge with robust, evidence-based approach while increasing our visibility, credibility, and contribution within European science and policy networks. I told I will not take too much time, but 2 minutes, okay. I hope these days will foster deep dialogue, probably new partnerships among all the people who are here, and practical pathways for implementing, moving to real action on the ground. You are here in Azores, and I would like also to invite you during your stay to experience the Azores, not only as I said, a meeting place, but as a living example of why biodiversity matters. Our 9 islands are displayed with volcanic lakes, deep blue seas, and natural thermal waters. It's a place that inspired generations of stories and legends, reminding us that biodiversity is not only to be studied, but also to be experienced and protected. So thank you very much for being here. I hope you have a nice session on this forum with a lot of inputs, with impact, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think we had some feedback from the online people that the sound was a bit low, so I'm turning to the technical magicians somewhere over there. And I'm passing now for the welcoming words from the co-chair of Biodiversa Plus, Mr. Magnus Tannefelt.
Loud enough? Okay, thank you very much. So welcome to this Science Policy Forum. After months of preparation, we're finally here now, in the room and online. First, I want to thank our kind hosts here in the Azores, FRCT, for hosting the event, and Dr. Teixeira, and for inviting us to your beautiful islands. I want to thank Osman Tikansak, who is really the mastermind behind all this, and the whole Biodiversa Plus operational team with Clara Superby in the lead, all partners, all speakers, and all participants in the room and online for joining us here. So welcome. Now, the topic of today is, of course, biodiversity and transformative change, science policy pathways for Europe. There we are. Right, so building on the insights from the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment, we will explore how governance, finance, justice frameworks, and behavioural change can support implementation in Europe, and how the EU policy instruments can enable transformative pathways and contribute to actionable solutions together with what we do and what the projects are doing. And as you know, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, is a comprehensive international agreement aimed at conserving biodiversity and sustainable use of natural resources. And it builds on the goals and objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, and integrates scientific findings and policy recommendations from IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. And the framework of the GBF aims to safeguard biodiversity and ecosystem services at the global level by strengthening international cooperation, setting ambitious targets, and promoting effective actions. And in a more regional context, we have the European Biodiversity Strategy 2030, which focuses on actions within the EU to halt biodiversity loss and restore ecosystems, aligning with the broader global objectives of the GBF. And in turn, the Biodiversa Plus strategic agenda, the SRIA, reflects these strategies in our cross-cutting and topical themes, including a focus on transformative change. So what do we bring to the table? Very briefly, we are working to mainstream transformative change into research and innovation and capacity building for science to policy. Support knowledge development and knowledge transfer in relation to the GBF targets and indicators and the CBD topics, and to improve biodiversity monitoring and its harmonization. Now, Biodiversa Plus is said to be the largest ever research program on biodiversity. We have 83 partners from 41 countries, integrating ministries and funding agencies for research, and ministries in charge of the environmental policies and environmental protection agencies. And we have quite a large portfolio in total, actually more than 800 million euros over the 7 years of Biodiversa Plus. And we cover a set of themes included in our strategic agenda, including supporting research, the calls that we launch one each year, like the BiodivTransform call, connecting research to policy, and that includes dialogue events, desk studies, policy briefs, and policy forum, just like this one. And we work on the global perspective, nature-based solutions, business and biodiversity, and again, transnational biodiversity monitoring, which is a very important work stream for us. So that is Biodiversa Plus in a nutshell. Here today, we have more than 100 participants here in the room, and 382 is the latest number of the registered online participants. And on the right there, you can see that we have mainly research performing organizations, so scientists from within the projects, from the evaluation committee, from our advisory board, and a lot of the funding organizations, the partners of Biodiversa Plus, and environmental and research policy actors, and some international organizations. So that's great. And I'll just say that this is one of several interesting events this week. This morning there was this capacity building workshop, and now we have the Science Policy Forum. Tomorrow there's a full day with the kickoff of the actual projects funded under the BiodivTransform call, and that is also a hybrid open event for anyone to join in. And then on Thursday there is a closed session, a clustering event for projects to work on cross-cutting thematic clusters. So now, please enjoy the meeting. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Magnus, for this nice introduction. And, well, we're going to get started with the content. And actually, we're going to have a very nice first keynote speech. And I will use this. Yes. So the first keynote speech is actually framing the concept of transformative change and presenting the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment. And we have the chance to have one of the co-chair of the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment online, Karen O'Brien. Karen is co-founder of the Sea Change and the Zenstrom Visiting Professor of Climate Change Leadership at Uppsala University. She's as well a Professor Emerita at University of Oslo. So, Karen, is it okay on your side? Yes? We're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to present the Transformative Change Assessment. And I wish I could be there in person, but I'm sending greetings from Uppsala. And I'm going to just share my slides on and walk you through how we think about transformative change. Let me just get this in slide mode. I'm going to talk about how we think about transformative change as both a concept and as a process, and pull out some of the insights of what we learned during the assessment. And from there, my colleague Camille Thibault will talk about how we put this into, how we implement this. So as many of you know, the assessment was on the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and the determinants of transformative change and options for achieving the 2050 vision for biodiversity. I think that's one of the longest titles ever, and we just call it the Transformative Change Assessment. But what it did was it was really trying to say, what is transformative change? What are our visions for the future? How do we approach it? Like, what type of knowledge do we need to take in? And importantly, what are the challenges and the barriers that we need to overcome? And how do we do this with strategies and actions? So we had 100 authors from about 40 countries, and we looked at more than 7,000 references and 800 visions and about 400 case studies, and tried to piece together, like, what do we know and what do we do and how do we do it? And one of the key findings and the basis for this assessment is that transformative change is urgent, necessary, and challenging, but possible. And but possible is really where we come in with this assessment. How do we do it? What do we have to do differently in order to achieve this, both in terms of policy and in practice? And as many of you know, we're in 2026, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 vision for the 2030 agenda. And what we're thinking of is, how do we actually achieve this? How do we transform at the rate and the scale and the speed and the depth that is called for? And in the assessment, we define transformative change as a deliberate shift, a fundamental systems-wide shift in views, structures, and practices that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. And when we say different ways, different views, we're talking about seeing, thinking, knowing, and structures are different ways of organizing, governing, and regulating, and practices are ways of doing, behaving, and relating. And all of these are action verbs, and it really is transformative change is not an outcome, but it's a process that we're engaged in. But we also recognize that we're not on track to meet most of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework Targets and the 2050 Vision for Biodiversity are all out there for us to, as goals to achieve. And we're not achieving them because of what we identify as 3 underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. And these are the disconnection from and domination over nature and people. In other words, seeing ourselves as separate from nature and in a very hierarchical relationship with other people. The concentration of power and wealth, and also the prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. And all 3 of these underlying causes then are, they're very much linked to not just the loss of biodiversity, but the indirect and direct drivers of nature's decline. So we have, from the Global Assessment in 2019, we can see that, that these underlying causes are the cultural and social patterns that give rise to the, what we call the indirect drivers, conflicts and epidemics, institutions and governments, demographic and socio-cultural trends, and economic and technological developments. And these influence land use and sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive and alien species, and others. So in other words, they are systemic to the polycrisis. So how do we address these? And here we bring in different types of knowledge, and we assessed all sorts of frameworks, models, theories, approaches to transformative change, and clustered them into 6 different types, including structural understandings of transformative change, systems understanding, science and technology, knowledge co-creation, inner transformations, and empowerment. So all of these present very important and diverse aspects of it, and we emphasize that indigenous and local knowledge contributes to all of these. So it's not a separate type of knowledge, but it's something that is very fundamental to all 6 types. Well, these different types of knowledge weave together in a way that gives us this idea that there's not one single type of knowledge that can answer the question of how to transform. Instead, it's a very dynamic process, and this is why the research projects that you're undertaking are so important, because it's very much about asking different questions and really finding out, what is it that we're missing here. And what I want to do now is just draw out some of these red threads that are holding, building this tapestry of knowledge on transformative change. But before I get there, I want to talk about the 5 strategies, and Camille is going to give a little bit more depth on these, but we've identified 5 strategies that have complementary and synergistic effects. In other words, we need all of them to address views, structures, and practices for a just and sustainable world. And the first one is conserving and regenerating places of value to nature and people. And this is really protecting biocultural values and places that are of high importance for biodiversity and the conservation of nature. The second is driving systemic change in the sectors most responsible for biodiversity loss and nature's decline, which include agriculture and livestock, mining, forestry, fossil fuel extraction, all of the things that have a disproportionately negative impact on nature. The third is transforming economic systems for nature and equity, and that includes financial systems. In other words, how do we design a system that actually works for nature and for in an equitable way? The fourth strategy is transforming governance systems to be integrative, inclusive, accountable, and adaptive. In other words, we need to organize ourselves differently in order to organize society differently. And finally, and importantly, shifting societal views and values to recognize and prioritize the fundamental interconnections between humans and nature. And again, I said all of these are very much complementary and synergistic because we need all of them. We need to shift the way we see the world, the way we organize, the way we relate, the way that we protect and regulate, and so on. But we know that there are also challenges to these strategies because, if it were, we know what to do, we know how to do it, but we see that there are these overarching challenges that are persistent, pervasive, and systemic, and they're constantly blocking transformative change rather than enabling transformative change. And these include persistent relations of domination, especially those that were propagated during colonial times and are persisting today, even as we move towards, green transformations, etc. The same patterns are there. Economic and political inequalities is another challenge because it makes it very difficult to see, and that goes tied into the concentration of power and wealth. Inadequate policies and unfit institutions. The nature of the problems are not suited to the nature of the institutions that we have. There's a mismatch there. And then unsustainable consumption and production patterns and limited access to clean technologies and uncoordinated knowledge and innovation systems. And here we know that all of these challenges play out in different ways, in different contexts, and they create barriers to transformative change. And the authors, my co-authors, refer to this image as the wheel of torture because it has so many of the different barriers that are in the way of transformative change. And these are, again, the way that wealth and power shape policy, the international monetary system, shareholder profit. And I won't go through all of them, but I think it's really important to recognize that we are, the way we have organized society is actually a barrier to transformative change. So how do we overcome those barriers? How do we actually move forward in different ways? And so just to kind of wrap up conceptually, the idea here is that the way that what we're seeing today in the world, and the fragmentation, the polarization, the paralysis when it comes to dealing with biodiversity loss and environmental change, is very much linked to almost the strengthening of these underlying causes of disconnection, concentration, and prioritization that I explained before. So how do we actually shift these? And this is where the principles of transformative change come into account. And principles are very much based on values. And we have the IPBES Values Assessment that came out in 2022 to show us that we need multiple ways of valuing nature. And this is really saying that if we want to transform, it needs to be grounded in equity and justice. It needs to be based on pluralism and inclusion. It needs to have respectful and reciprocal human nature relationships, and we need adaptive learning and action. And that last one, adaptive learning and action, is necessary because there will always be unexpected consequences and surprises related to transformative change. So what we want to do then is think about how can we actually move forward with strategies and actions that are based on these values, that address the challenges and shift the underlying causes, based on visions and using the knowledge that we have. So in short, that a just and sustainable world is possible, and we actually know what we need to do differently. And I think that if we want to have this a sustainable world that works for everybody, we need to think about how we design differently, how we show up differently, and how we engage differently with transformative change. And this means it has very practical implications. And just to in terms of just wrapping up, I want to bring out some of the red threads that come out from our assessment here, and these are things that are just kind of things that we need to keep in mind. And the first one, again, is that transformative change is possible and can be promoted, amplified, and scaled. And it doesn't mean just scaling up and scaling out and scaling deep and these things, but it really is how do we shift the patterns at all scales. And that's where everybody, we need an all of society and all of governance approach. We also want to emphasize that even small incremental changes contribute to transformative change when they address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. Often people say, there's incremental changes versus transformative change, but as a process, transformative change is made up of many small changes that are moving in the same direction towards the visions for a just and sustainable world, and the 2050 vision for biodiversity loss. So our assessment shows that it is the direction and quality of transformative change that makes a difference. So transformative change, we see it happening all over the world today, but what we're trying to do is guide it towards a particular vision and based on values that really apply towards like the integrity of both people and ecosystems. And the fourth one is that synergy and alignment are important since there is no single vision or pathway for transformative change. We need to be looking at specific contexts, at specific what's important at particular historical periods, etc. And this is where our almost 400 case studies come out, and they show that there are many, many examples of transformative change taking different forms and shape in the world, but having an impact that actually can scale when we address the challenges and the barriers. So it's not just what people do, but it's how they do it that makes a difference in transformative change. So it's about processes, it's about engagement, it's about co-production, empowerment, it's about inner transformations to shift the systems and structures, taking in science and technology. And so that's really the kind of knowledge that we need. And the idea here, and this links very much to the Nexus assessment, which was carried out in parallel as a sister assessment with ours, is that transformative change can have positive impacts on all dimensions of the poly crisis. So it's not just to address one issue, but it's really getting to the underlying structures and patterns and that are underlying all of the different problems that we're seeing in the world today. So that leaves a very hopeful message that it's possible, that we need to do things differently, that small changes make a difference, and that every single person can contribute to this. And that was a clear, just to end on this, it was a very imperative in our assessment among the authors that this would not be an assessment that sits on the shelf or is just very conceptual and theoretical. We wanted it to be put into practice, so the summary for policymakers includes a user's guidance that kind of walks you through this in relation to whatever project, initiative, or policy that you might be working on, to start to have little checklists of how we can take it from a very abstract conceptual idea into a very specific practice. So with that, I will end and be happy to take any questions and and pass it on to Camille to give it more of the implementation part of it. So thank you.
So thanks a lot, Karen. Thanks also for giving a bit of hope through this aspect of transformative change in a very gloomy international scene right now. So I think we all need to grasp all those messages of hope. I suggest you hold on to your questions, and we take Camille's presentation, and we'll have questions for both presentations. They are very complementary. And please, participants who are online, don't hesitate also to share some questions if you want. We'll collect them after the second presentation. So I'm very pleased to invite Camille Guibal to join us on stage. So Camille, I don't know, sorry, where you are, please join me. So Camille is a scientific officer at the Foundation for Biodiversity Research in France, and you're also the French Substaco National Focal Point. You were previously the CBD Focal Point for France, and you were part of the technical support unit for the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment. So you're also very much into how it developed and what came out of it. And I really like also the fact that you discovered through this experience how you can actually have the power of inner transformation as well. So thanks a lot, Camille. Please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Actually, can I borrow the clicker from you? Yeah. Thank you. And bear with me because there might be a lot of text in my presentation, but it's for your own good. Okay. So, yes. Okay. So I'm going to follow up on some of what Karen has said. Oh, let me. All right. Okay. So how can transformative change levers be used to implement the Kunming-Montreal global biodiversity framework? The idea for this presentation is really for me to kind of walk you through how what came out of the transformative change assessment fits in with, or doesn't, we'll see, I guess, with the global biodiversity framework. And so my focus will be both on the challenges and the strategies that came out of the transformative change assessment. So the global biodiversity framework, has 23 action targets. It's based on the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. It sets ambitious 2030 targets and 2050 goals. The progress for this to be implemented depends on system-wide change, and this also relates to transformative change. The IPBES Transformative Change Assessment answers how we can achieve those goals and targets, and the vision, of course, but not just what to achieve. Transformative change is defined as fundamental system-wide shifts in views, structures, and practices. But if you want deliberate transformative change for a just and sustainable world, it needs to shift views, structures, and practices in ways that address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and nature's decline. And so here you see the direct drivers of biodiversity loss, the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, and then the underlying causes, which are, as Karen said, disconnection from and domination over nature and people, concentration of power and wealth, and prioritization of short-term individual and material gains. The GBF addresses the direct and indirect drivers, but implementation requires tackling them structurally. So if we look at challenge 1, I'm going into the challenges that Karen has presented. Challenge 1, which is the relations of domination over nature and people, especially those that emerged and were propagated in colonial eras and have persisted over time. We see that biodiversity loss is rooted in, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to switch the slides. Biodiversity loss is rooted in worldviews that treat nature as exploitable, linked to colonial dynamics, dispossession, and marginalization of indigenous peoples and local communities. The GBF emphasizes rights-based approaches. It recognizes indigenous peoples and local communities. It calls for equitable governance and benefit sharing. So if we look at the key targets for this, we would focus on, and this is not exhaustive, but target 13, access and benefit sharing related to genetic resources, target 21 on traditional knowledge, target 22 on the full and equitable participation in decision-making for various stakeholders. But the GBF doesn't explicitly address colonialism or the historical responsibility and power imbalances in global decision-making. They remain largely unchanged at this point. It acknowledges justice and rights, but only partially confronts the deeper structural roots of domination that is identified in the Transformative Change Assessment. If we look at challenge 2 on economic and political inequalities, powerful actors that have vested interests might resist transformative change that will, in effect, reduce their privileges. And then if you look at marginalized or vulnerable populations, they may perceive transformative change as adding a burden or a risk to their already precarious lives, such as when change might negatively affect employment and development, for example. The GBF focuses on equity and fairness in implementation, and so if you look again at some of the key targets, target 19 on financial resources, including international flows, target 23 on gender equality, target 22, inclusion and participation. They're helpful, obviously. It integrates equity principles, but its ability to reduce inequality depends heavily on the country's implementation and financing. You're going to say, duh, that's what happens in any multilateral agreement, right? But still, that burden is really important. That's where the responsibility lies also for the transformative change we need to happen. International economic inequalities show up on a regular basis in the CBD negotiations, and they remain difficult to resolve in some of these discussions, not only at the CBD, but in various international negotiation processes. So looking at challenge 3 on inadequate policies and unfit institutions, the idea behind this is that reformist responses to biodiversity loss and nature's decline that do not address the underlying causes that we've seen this morning and this afternoon as well can challenge transformative change when they obscure the indirect drivers on biodiversity loss. And in doing that, they may lead to a sense that effective action has occurred when in reality it was not sufficient. For example, many biodiversity offsets may seem to address biodiversity loss, but they have faced challenges with compliance and difficulties in managing the complexity of measurement and offsetting. There's also instances in which poorly designed and or governed offset schemes led to dispossession and violations of the respective rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and there are many other challenges that can be linked to this as well. So if we look at some of the key GBF targets here, we have target 14 on biodiversity mainstreaming, which means we'd integrate biodiversity across all sectors. Target 14 on corporate accountability and disclosure. Target 18, reforming harmful incentives. Target 21, knowledge sharing. So the GBF promotes a whole of government and whole of society approach that Karen has also mentioned as being key for transformative change, along with biodiversity mainstreaming. But again, the implementation remains largely within the hands of the parties, the countries, with uneven capacity and willingness to do so. The uneven capacity is addressed in a way in the global biodiversity framework with capacity building, technology transfer. But again, because we are in a multilateral setting, we need to make sure that the implementation happens at the national level. Now, looking at challenge 4 on unsustainable consumption and production patterns, we have a big focus in the assessment on telecoupling effects over distance, including through trade. that may cause economic incentives to increase consumption through efficiencies of scale and may obscure environmental impacts because they occur in faraway places. In terms of key GBF targets here, we have target 15, where businesses assess, disclose, and reduce biodiversity-related risks, target 16 on sustainable consumption, target 10 on sustainable production, target 7 on pollution reduction. Here, although the GBF addresses unsustainable consumption and production patterns to an extent, any discussion that relates to international trade not being within the mandate of the CBD keeps coming up, and especially when discussing sustainable supply chains, due diligence, etc. On challenge 5, regarding the limited access to clean technologies and uncoordinated knowledge and information systems, planned obsolescence, for example, and premature aging of technologies are exacerbated by rebound effects, and they cause unsustainable production and use. In terms of key GBF targets, we have here target 20 on capacity building and technology transfer, which I've mentioned already. Target 19, financial support for implementation. Target 15 on businesses, again. Target 10 on sustainable production. So the GBF acknowledges technology gaps, but it doesn't necessarily deeply engage with structural barriers themselves. So switching to strategies for transformative change, you'll see the 5 strategies here on the screen and then the associated action, but you've heard them already. I've tried to kind of map the strategies along with the GBF targets and analyze how they contribute to that. So strategy 1 kind of focuses on where the change happens, and the GBF directly operationalizes the area-based and restoration targets. And if they're coupled, I've listed the targets here, but if those are coupled with targets 21 and 22, then they ensure inclusivity and participation in doing so. Strategy 2, on where the pressures are from, the GBF tackles direct drivers of biodiversity loss at scale and ensures sectoral policies align with biodiversity goals. If you look at strategy 3, which is mostly on what drives the decisions, then the GBF aligns economic incentives with biodiversity outcomes and aims to unlock the resources required for implementation. Moving on to strategy 4, and is this more on how the decisions are made? The GBF provides the institutional architecture that's needed to implement the targets and aims for coherent, participatory, and flexible decision making. And then in strategy 5, on why decisions are made, the GBF addresses the deep root causes of biodiversity loss and enables long-term sustained behavioral change, but it may not be transformative. So if you look at the risks and trade-offs, transformative change can create social resistance and unequal impacts, and we've mentioned this before. Poorly designed policies can worsen inequalities. So for it to work, we need transformation that's socially just and politically viable and durable. And we come back to the principles, which Karen has mentioned also. In order for the transformative change to work and to help us achieve the 2050 vision, it needs to be principled. So we need equity and justice. We need pluralism and inclusion, respectful and reciprocal human nature relationships. And we need adaptive learning and action. We need to adapt as we go. And it must be based on a whole of society and whole of government approach. And this is my last slide, I believe, and it's the same one as Karen, because I think this tool is really helpful when you start an initiative, when you're starting a project, even if you're not starting and you want to make sure that what you do is transformative. This is a tool that is meant to guide you and help you understand how you can do that and make sure you're covering everything that needs to be covered for the transformative change you're aiming for to actually happen. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much, and I hope I didn't lose you along the way. It's a lot, but you'll have access to the slides as well, and I hope that will be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Camille. Yeah, I think it's also nice to keep this resource after the workshop to dig in more in details into what you brought as the links between the Transformative Change Assessment and the GBF proposals and targets. I think we can have Camille, if you don't mind staying a bit with me and having Karen back on screen. I'd like to know if we have a few questions on those two presentations before we jump into some other perspectives on transformative change. Also from the online setting, no? Nope. And in the room, yes, please. We have someone over there. Can you just introduce quickly yourself before asking the question? And to whom you want to ask the question?
Yes, hi, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Mark Leandri. I'm an economist, a member of the Biodiversa Plus evaluating committee. I think everyone agrees that justice, societal acceptance are important conditions to move forward with transformative change. However, we also know that some of the hotspots in terms of biodiversity are located in countries where it could result quite difficult to enforce or at least to suggest to include those dimensions are necessary conditions for change. So what would be your, maybe not solution, but at least answer or ideas for this?
I don't know if Karen and then maybe Camille. Karen, did you hear the question related to how to actually use the idea of justice, social justice in the hotspot for biodiversity where you have other interests and challenges?
Could you repeat that one more time? Because I'm getting a little bit, the sound of the speaker,
Yeah, but the question was related to how to reconcile this idea of social justice and within hotspots of biodiversity where you have very much other interests at stake. And what would be your take on that?
Yeah. Well, our assessment really showed that a lot of the defenders, like environmental defenders, that are at great risk, and many have been killed, especially women and people, indigenous peoples, as defenders. And so that really it means then that when we talk about the whole of society and whole of governance approach, we need to actually have the make it very safe to defend nature, safe to work with nature, and to bring justice and equity and justice are the core principles. So how do we actually put that into practice? And so what we see is then it does take coalitions of actors, and our case study analysis shows that there are always different groups of actors, and they have to be supporting each other. And if I heard the question correctly, then I think that there is it becomes an all of society approach to protecting people who protect nature. And but it is that, again, the principles have to be at the core of this, but also solidarity with all of society and all of nature.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Camille, you want to add something on this aspect? No? Thank you. Any additional question? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Isabel Mesquita, part of the evaluation committee as well. I wanted to talk a bit and hear your comments on that, one of the pillars of the presentation you both shared on concentration of wealth and how this should be tackled. The way I see it, it's very challenging to handle privilege and having people lose their privilege to avoid these aspects. So I really wanted to hear if you have any thoughts or how research can really support in that.
Thanks a lot, Isabel. Camille, maybe on this aspect of how to tackle the resistance of the ones with privilege and concentration of wealth. Has it been discussed in the CBD arenas?
So to be honest, I think I will at some point hand it over to Karen, because there's a big thought process on power and how power can be both a challenge but also a lever for transformative change. And I'm sure Karen will have plenty to say about that. But the idea is that power is a blocker, and so the concentration of wealth does reflect that. But at the same time, social movements also play a huge role in that. And the power, when principled, when you use the principles in the way that you use the power you have and you make sure the power is distributed in a more equal way, then you change that concentration of wealth and power in general. But I'll hand it over to Karen because she'll explain it much better than I can.
Thanks a lot, Karen.
No, that was a very nice explanation, Camille. And I think that what we're really trying to say is that the concentration of wealth is very much tied to the challenges of inequalities and structural changes. So in our taxation systems, there's a lot of economic structures that maintain that wealth, and there's a lot of debates now in the world about how to create it more equal. And over the trajectory of time, we've seen, if you read about the history of equality by Thomas Piketty, that we were moving towards more equity and more justice, and we have these fallback periods. So that's why if we're going to address the concentration of power and wealth, we have to address our economic systems. We have to address our governance systems, but also the societal views and values. So they all piece together very much, and then they go into addressing the sectors that contribute most and protecting areas and things. So it's really but the concentration of wealth really is a structural issue, and it's very much tied to this idea that some people have more power than others, and it social mobilizations, inner transformations, and transformative learning. There's a lot of things that actions that we discuss in the assessment that can contribute to actually shifting those very persistent patterns. So it's a great question and very important at this time.
Okay, thanks a lot, Karen. If you can hold on to your question, we have another Q&A at the end of the presentations. I think we actually are going, thanks a lot, Camille, and Karen, stay online as we have also some discussion at the end of the session with presentations. I think we are going actually to jump into one of the aspects that was touched upon in the question, which is justice and equity in biodiversity transformation, and going from principles to practice with Amanda Laufen. Amanda, can you join me? So Amanda manages a Swiss NGO called Human Right to Water, specialized in water governance and related to human rights. And your background stems from working in New Zealand as a project manager for community water projects. So Amanda, I pass you to the floor. Do you prefer standing with the microphone?
Yeah, I'm going to rely on the slides for my notes. Yeah, thanks. Hi. We've heard what a challenge it is to have transformative change for biodiversity, and nobody's not recognizing that. We've started looking at biodiversity as a human right. It's currently recognized within the right to a healthy environment, but not as an independent right. And it could be a way to help elevate it to a place where it might get a little bit more attention. And I'm just going to give you an overview. I only have 12 minutes, so I don't think I can go into detail on the slides. I'm going to paraphrase them. Can you hear me? Okay, so the NGO I work for, Human Right to Water, we work on water and sanitation for vulnerable and marginalized people. And we work on research into law and policy related to international human rights law. So we do country studies. Every year we study about 30 different countries using methodologies based on human rights standards and principles and see how they are integrating those laws. What we've done here with biodiversity is to develop new methodology, thinking of it as a human right. A little bit of background about our NGO, which is based in Switzerland. We're grant funded. We do a lot of research, and we do advocacy on the back of that and training. So starting with, I don't know how familiar you are with human rights, but there are many human rights and they're all equally important and interrelated. And if you look at the right to water, it's right in the middle of all of the human rights because they're all dependent on water for life, for food, for health, and the right to dignity and captures all of those. Biodiversity is present in a healthy environment. It's not just recognized in the right to a healthy environment, but it's clearly a marker for whether or not we have a healthy environment. And so, given the deep interconnection between all these rights, safeguarding and restoring biodiversity must be a central priority. And so I'm going to make the case that by protecting biodiversity, we're also protecting other human rights. I don't think this slide adds any more value to what I've just said. You'll have access to these slides, so maybe you can have a think about it when you read them afterwards. So recognizing biodiversity as a standalone human right could ensure, or should ensure, that detailed legal safeguards and stronger state obligations are ensured. Because if it's a human right, it has to be respected, protected, and fulfilled by duty bearers in the country. It also provides rights holders with the ability to claim their rights. So if they think they haven't got access to a human right, such as biodiversity, then they have the right to go to their ombudsman and say something about it. And I think that we need to think about sustainability. So one of the reasons I got into this was thinking about long-term sources of water resources and how they can ensure access to drinking water for vulnerable and marginalized people. And in my view, if you have biodiversity, you have a healthy environment, therefore you automatically look after your water resources. So I felt like it was a way to maybe encourage more people to think about biodiversity as a more holistic need, not just for nature, but for human beings. And I think that came out very clearly in the previous presentations also. I don't need to tell this audience about biodiversity loss, but I wanted to just make the point that degraded habitats and overexploited fisheries also disproportionately affect local and indigenous communities and people who depend on them for a livelihood. It doesn't just relate to the reduction of ecosystems, but also aesthetic, cultural, and economic values of the environment. So it's really thinking about it in a more holistic framework. As I said before, states have a duty to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. That means that they have to show progressive realization. You can't provide it immediately, but you're obligated to make progress to the maximum extent of available resources in a reasonable time. And the duty bearers are the government, the businesses, the parliamentarians. These are the people we're aiming at to try and encourage them to take their responsibilities. And as I said, rights holders include all of us, and especially vulnerable and marginalized groups of people. And by having a recognition of a right, a human right, they also have that awareness that they should have access to biodiversity. When we were doing this research, we realized that there was the human right to biodiversity isn't recognized explicitly. But when we were collecting all the international laws and treaties and covenants together and labeling them as standards and principles of the human rights to biodiversity along the same lines of the right to water, we realized that it's spread across a number of different international and regional frameworks and instruments. So quite difficult to find your way through. So no wonder governments are struggling with how to do it, because if you're looking at it as a human right, you have to look at so many different types of instruments to get to all the policies that you need to include. So we work with our expert committee of human rights, water governance, biodiversity experts, and we use them to help us develop the methodology for this assessment. we typically work on around a framework that's a questionnaire that we then ask lawyers in the countries to help us complete. And in the case of biodiversity, we've looked at more than 20 countries, and we're in the process of mapping them. It's like a gap analysis. So we've tended to pick the countries that have laws already rather than the ones that don't, because otherwise we'd end up with an empty questionnaire. So we really picked some of the countries that have already made some progress in this area. And if you look at the human rights standards and principles, the standards are around access, affordability, quality, acceptability, and then you have the procedural guarantees, which are the human rights-based approach, which are around how you make that available through non-discrimination, access to information, public participation, accountability, which is monitoring and responsibility, and then ultimately sustainability. So a lot of this was covered in the transformative change discussions earlier, or presentations, but we've collected it into a structured framework. And I won't go through these now, but this explains how we've viewed biodiversity from an accessibility, availability perspective for the questionnaires that we've developed. And the same with the principles of the human rights-based approach. And then the questionnaire is structured. Each country that we study we end up with a 50-page report, but it collects together all the legislation and policy related to biodiversity in that country. But then we also have it structured according to the standards and principles of the human rights principles. And we have a dashboard summary, we have the countries that we've completed already, and as I said, we're in the middle of getting the results at the moment, so these are the first ones that have been completed, and I'll be able to reference some of the good practices from those today, but in the next couple of months we should have the rest of the 21 or 22 that we're looking at. If you look at the standards and principles, we've basically scored them according to whether or not there is a law or not on that topic, and there's maybe 10 questions under each heading. So for accessibility, if they have a law for each of the 10 questions we pull together, they get 100%. And on average, about 80% of the laws were covered in these countries. But you can see that quality was clearly an easy one for our countries to implement. It's not a statement of compliance. Just be careful on that. It's just whether or not they have this written in law and policy. So it's not necessarily happening, but it's a starting point. And the ones that were the least available were affordability and acceptability and non-discrimination and equity. So these are areas that need more work. And there's clearly gaps in terms of people's understanding of interpretations of the existing international frameworks. So I've gone through a few best practices. I can't read all of this because we're going to run out of time, but what we've basically done in the questionnaire is draw upon, the existing international frameworks, such as the CBD, to pull together the questions that fit under each heading. So under accessibility, we're looking at equitable access for all, enjoyment of access, inclusion, public access to all typologies, and there's about 10 questions. And this is an example of the type of law that we will pull up. So in Colombia, which did well on this questionnaire, it's one of the countries that's further ahead in terms of implementing international laws and policies. They have a strong law on equitable access. As I said, that doesn't mean that they're doing much about it yet, but it's a starting point, and at least it's through constitutional rights, which is at the highest level. It's getting political support. I've got examples on affordability with some of the questions, and in this case, Australia has a number of legislations. Under acceptability, Mexico has, and it brings in all the indigenous, the groups of the different marginalized communities, and protection of rights. Under non-discrimination, and I'm not covering all of the principles here, but Costa Rica has some strong laws around biodiversity and environmental equity, especially including women. and Indigenous rights. So I'm just giving you a taste of the questionnaire and the results so far, so that you understand what we've got. And if you want to find out more, you can come and talk to me. I'm here just for today, this evening, so please come and talk to me later on in the day. Here's a link to the project site, which has got all our country legal mappings on. Biodiversity isn't up there yet, but you can see the type of approach that we have. And if you would like us to support on any projects, we'd be very interested. We have a massive database of information on the countries that we study, not just for biodiversity, but on water governance. So we would like to be able to use that. We have a responsibility to make sure it's being used. So please get in touch with me, and I'd love to have a chat with anyone interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I suggest that during the break, for those who would like to know more about this analysis of collating biodiversity laws with the human principles as a target, that you approach Amanda. I think you will be very interesting also to exchange on project-based, how this can be useful for project. For timing's sake, I'm going to move on to the next speaker. So Paola Harrison from the CEH, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Paola was the co-chair also for the Nexus assessment in IPBES. So you're making the links actually with the Nexus assessments. We're going to have to ask you to use the standing microphone. I'm sorry about that, but we have some sound issue with my microphone, so please, if you can use this one. And yeah, I let you get started with the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to be drawing on the findings from the IPBES Nexus assessment. I was very privileged to co-chair it over the last 3 years, where it was undertaken in parallel to the Transformative Change Assessment. And what I want to do in my presentation is really sort of show how the Nexus approach can really help to inform sort of transformative pathways to more just and sustainable futures, and how that sort of synergizes and complements the presentation that Karen gave and Camille on the Transformative Change Assessment. Okay, so what I'm just going to start with is just a quick overview of sort of the three main headline messages that came out of the Nexus assessment. Just reminding you here that the Nexus assessment focused on 5 elements, and these were interlinkages between biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change. So that first headline message is our crises are interlinked, but our responses are not. And here we're really referring to biodiversity loss, climate change, water and food insecurity, and health threats. And it is really making the point from evidence in the assessment that many of our responses to these crises are not only ineffective currently, but they can be counterproductive in that we are trying to solve one of these crises, we can inadvertently make other ones worse. Second headline message is really that there is hope out there. There are solutions that already exist for us to manage these crises together in synergistic ways. And in the assessment, we evaluated over 70 different response options that do just that. They have co-benefits across biodiversity, climate, water, food, and health. And the third headline message is that, again, this is very synergistic with one of the headline messages that came out of the Transformative Change Assessment, is that there is a role for everyone. It's this whole of society, whole of government approach, and really emphasizing the importance that the evidence does show that if we bring people together to work together cooperatively, adaptively, and equitably, then we have more synergistic and more effective benefits across this polycrisis. What I'm going to do in this presentation is dig into each of those headline messages quite briefly, focusing more on the solutions. But again, I'm just going to start here with a single slide just to introduce the challenge. Okay, so we have a chapter in the assessment that really focuses on how biodiversity, climate, water, food, and health crises are all interacting with each other, how they create these cascading and compounding effects. The schematic on the right-hand side of the slide there, and I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for you to see it in this light and at that scale, is really just an illustration that is from the Summary for Policymaker of one of the major drivers of biodiversity loss. So if land use changes from conversion of biodiverse ecosystems to unsustainable intensive agriculture, then it shows there are all these cascading effects that are negative and lead to reducing biodiversity, which is the bottom green box. But they're not just directly to reducing biodiversity, they often go through water, through either water availability, through overuse of irrigation, through water quality, through agrochemical inputs. They go through exacerbating climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. All of those affect biodiversity, but they also all affect human health and well-being, as well as land use change, affecting directly health through disconnecting people from nature, but also increasing some contact between humans, domestic animals and wildlife, which can increase that incidence of emerging zoonotic diseases. So what we make the case of in the assessment really is that our current efforts are failing to really respond to these crises together. And that's really because those responses are often still siloed. We have different policy departments working on individual objectives. They can often conflict. They can lead to perverse costs and incentives, and they can lead to unintended consequences. But what we really show in the assessment as well is how essential biodiversity is as that foundation to our food and our water systems, to our human health and our well-being, and to the stability of our climate and to the stability of our economy, with really over half of global GDP being reliant on being generated in sectors that are moderately or highly dependent upon nature. And we, again, as we all know, biodiversity still is declining in all regions of the world. And it really is, this is underlined and emphasized by the need to transform our economic and financial systems. There is evidence we have a whole chapter focusing on transformation of our economic and financial systems. And that is really talking about how sort of 30 to 35 times more resources are generated in sectors that directly damage or degrade biodiversity than support it. So that real need to move from those negative financial flows to positive financial flows, including closing that biodiversity funding gap estimated in that range of 0.3 to 1 trillion per year. So then just focusing more on solutions, there are two main areas of evidence that we use looking at solutions. And the first of those was looking at 186 different scenarios and pathway studies. That information was clustered into what we've called 6 scenario archetypes, which are the rows in these tables. And we looked at the implications of those different types of pathways towards the future on our different nexus elements, so on biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate. And in this table, blue basically means there's a positive impact, red means there's a negative impact. The larger the stack of triangles, the greater the magnitude of the impact. So just to draw out 3 messages from that table. The first, if we go from the bottom of the table upwards, there we see the scenario archetypes called nature, overexploitation, and food first. They're very much exemplifying a business as usual continuation of our current trends in direct and indirect drivers. And again, you can see there that a predominance of red arrows showing again that we are going to continue having those negative outcomes across the different nexus elements and potentially trade-offs. The food first is very much similar to the previous slide, where I was showing how prioritizing food above all other nexus elements leads to these cascading negative effects. The second message coming out of this slide is really scenarios and pathways which have taken a siloed approach. So they either take optimization approaches or they're focused on a single element. And there you can see that those tens of scenarios really show you get trade-offs or unintended consequences. So in the boxes that are highlighted there are the 3 archetypes that finish with the word first: conservation first, climate first, food first. You can see there's a mixture of red and blue outcomes. But then, of course, the important one as we move to the top of the table, there is evidence from these scenarios and pathway studies that positive outcomes for people and nature are feasible in the future. And they really exemplify integrated and timely actions. They show there's not one pathway to the future, there's several, and you get different magnitudes of positive impacts depending on which pathway you take. Those scenarios and pathways tend to have actions that include things like shifting towards sustainable production and consumption systems, combined with greater emphasis on conservation and restoration of ecosystems, reducing pollution, and strong climate mitigation and adaptation actions. We dig into that but with another source of evidence where we looked at the empirical data underlying different response options that are out there in different case studies around the world. And we looked at 71 different response options, and I realize you won't be able to read the detail in this table. I only need you to see the pattern of the dots. Those 71 response options were categorized into these 10 broad categories that are in the larger text around the side of this graphic. So around conserving important ecosystems, restoring degraded ecosystems, managing our human-dominated ecosystems, consuming sustainably, reducing pollution, moving to more integrated planning and governance options, managing risk, ensuring rights and equity, aligning finance, and a group of others which are around that importance of connecting people with nature and things like nature on prescription. And again, here what I want you to see is look again at the dots in the table. Again, blue means positive impact of that response option against each of our Nexus elements. The Nexus elements are the columns, again going in the order of biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate. And the red are negative impacts. And what you can really see there is there are a lot of blue dots. A lot of those blue dots are quite large, and the larger the dot is, the greater the magnitude of the benefit or the negative impact. And if we just zoom in a little bit, so you can literally see a little bit, 2 examples just to bring it a little bit to life. One on restoring soil health. Again, there you can see we have 5 blue dots, so co-benefits across all 5 Nexus elements, really highlighting the importance of this response option for enhancing soil biodiversity, water regulation and food production, also supporting climate change mitigation by increasing carbon storage, as well as providing climate change adaptation and resilient benefits. And then the other one on integrating landscape and seascape approaches. Again, here really recognizing the connection across realms, how we manage our land affects our freshwater, our coastal, our marine systems, particularly for things like water quality and biodiversity. So I'm going to try and move on a bit quicker. That was all around about this, more around the what. This is really about how do we implement those response options in practice. And this really focuses on how we have to transform our governance systems to make them more integrated, inclusive, equitable, and adaptive. And again, very much echoing what Karen was saying from the Transformative Change Assessment. And here we talk about how Nexus governance approaches enable this by acting on the indirect and direct drivers and our challenges around our current siloed approaches through the 5 key components written on this slide around Nexus governance. So this is moving to more integrated and holistic framings of our problems and solutions, more inclusive approaches that bring diverse actors together, considerations of equity, justice, and accountability, more processes for collaboration and coordination across sectors and scales, and moving to more adaptive, reflexive, and experimental approaches so that we can learn from our successes and scale those out. It emphasizes the importance of strengthening our capacities so that we can understand how to be motivated, how to bridge between disciplines and actors, how to negotiate to surface and negotiate interests and values of different actors, how to bring in social networking, and how to use analytical tools that are available, and we reviewed over 200 different decision support tools for helping us to move towards more Nexus governance approaches. It also emphasizes, again, the importance of how scaling can really help us to accelerate the adoption, implementation, and amplification of these response options. Okay, so just my last point here around the role for everyone. And this here, we brought together all of the information across our 3 chapters on solutions into this roadmap of Nexus, this roadmap for Nexus action. And this is, again, similar to the tool that the Transformative Change Assessment produced. It's a series of 8 different steps. There are questions beyond those steps that allow a wide range of actors, including government, civil society, and the private sector, to go through those steps and actually understand how they can be applied to their own specific context. So it's really understanding, for your context, you need to bring together the right actors, you need to understand the indirect and direct drivers at play and those nexus interactions. From that, you can then work together to co-create your shared vision for how you want things to change, to align values across those different actors that allows you to move towards that coordinated and strategic action, which allows you to identify appropriate response options and assess their synergies and trade-offs. That then allows you to move towards implementation and scaling of them, negotiating how you can strengthen enabling conditions, overcome barriers, and it really emphasizes the importance of monitoring continuously across those steps to learn from what works and adapt where is needed. And again, to conclude, again, I will go through these very briefly because I know I'm out of time. Again, we really emphasize the importance of urgent action to tackle our polycrises. Our assessment provides a lot of evidence on these nexus interactions. It also assesses this wide range of response options so that we can tackle the crises together, as well as how we need to transform both governance and economic systems in order to implement those response options. We provide information on tools to help do that, including, again, this how we change different systems and recognizing that everybody has a role to play in this shift to a just and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for going so fast in such a dense and rich content. I really appreciate it. It's always a frustration because we have so many questions, okay, even myself actually, but we are running a bit out of time, and I would love to have some time afterwards to discuss more as well. So I'm going to have the last speaker join me, Cengiz Akendil from University of Zurich. For this first session. Actually, Cengiz is bringing some interesting double profile, as you were part of the financial systems for quite a long time. And your research now is looking at how you can integrate economics and ecology by developing metrics beyond GDP. So maybe you're the one who can bring a bit of how do we manage with this concentrated wealth and the power of finances. I will suggest that you take the big, the microphone. And, okay? Yes. Your floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. And my talk will be about the transforming economic and financial systems for biodiversity. And, And I will start with the IPBES 2019 report, which was a milestone report and a wake-up call for the whole society, in my opinion, which was indicating that around 1 million species face extinction in the near future. The same report stated that in the past 50 years, the human population has doubled, the global economy has grown nearly fourfold, and the global trade has grown tenfold, which was together driving up the demand for energy and materials. And also, when we look at the Dasgupta report in the two years afterwards, it was indicating that like the consistent increase in the produced capital, while natural capital is consistently declining at the same time, which meant economic growth came at the expense of the nature. And the decline in the natural capital is called externalities in the economics, which is a convenient term to make nature invisible into the economic system. But when we internalize these externalities, can we really speak about the economic growth? This is the main question, and the other question follows up, obviously, how we can shape and shift the economic system. In this diagnosis at hand, like we cannot anymore tweak and small changes in the economic system. We need transformative change, and we need that urgently. And 2 years ago, as Karen was mentioning, like IPBES was preparing another milestone report about the transformative change, which was designed, the transformative change was defined as the fundamental system-wide shifts in views, structures, and practices. And when we look at the main drivers of the biodiversity loss, they are all related to economics and the economic activities of the humans. So economics and economic system must be in the heart of the transformative change. And also the same report was mentioning the barriers to the transformative change, which I will be focusing on two issues there concerning the economics. One is the ideology of the perpetual growth, which I will come later on. And the next is the inequalities and the power concentration in the economic system. As we say, I mean, if economics is in the heart of the biodiversity loss, then the financial markets are actually in the heart of the economic system, because they decide how to distribute the access to the capital. And also financial markets amplify structural inequalities two key ways. The first one is short-term returns dominate, while the long-term risks discounted heavily. And the second is profits are privatized, while the ecological and social risks are pushed onto the society. What we have seen in the 2008 crisis, one extreme form of these confirmation of these inequalities. What was happening was many of the financial institutions, they went bankrupt, but the government came in and saved these financial institutions by saying they are too big to fail. So this is an interesting thing, because this cannot happen in capitalism. Because in capitalism, when a company goes bankrupt, they are replaced with some other companies who are making this better. And this government comes in and saves bankrupt companies happened in America, in the heart of capitalism, which in my opinion marked the death of the capitalism. So now we need to ask the question, what is the system then? Like, what is it following? Because right now, for that one, we also need to answer who was most exposed to the financial meltdown at that point. And that is the largest asset owners and largest shareholders. So basically, majority of the normal public, they were debtors to those financial institutions. What the government was making is basically more confirming this 1% towards the 99% divide. And also saying the power concentration, we need to look at how the financial markets developed since 2008 crisis, almost 2 decades later. And normally, we would expect that as the too big to fail was the main problem, the governments and regulators make the necessary and make these problems disappear somehow. But we observe the opposite. There has been asset managers became real, proper giants in the market. That BlackRock is right now managing more than 14 trillion US dollars, and Vanguard is managing more than 12 trillion US dollars, and there are many, many more asset managers in the market. And this is like obviously too big to ignore, but also like shows like how big and how powerful the financial institutions they become. On the other hand, when we look at the global biodiversity funding, it's around 150 billion US dollars. Basically, biodiversity funding at the moment is a rounding error for the financial markets. And another thing is, like in the 2008 crisis, especially following the 2008 crisis, what was happening is negative interest rates we were observing. This is a very, very interesting concept. So you basically loan someone $100 US, and at the end of the term, you receive $90 something. This is basically against everything you have ever learned in the financial markets prior to 2008 crisis. But it happened. It's like in the central banks, they have crossed that barrier. They have introduced the negative interest rates. What is the most interesting part is the financial markets reacted almost immediately and transformed themselves to deal with the new situation almost immediately. So they developed new hedging strategies, they developed new trading strategies, and that was okay. So what we see in the ideology of the perpetual growth, we have exactly the same problem right now. Like, this is a taboo topic. Nobody in the financial markets or the economic system wants to speak about. But that becomes a reality. Because degrowth is not about an alternative economic system. Degrowth is a consequence of the ecological limits, basically. Any system, whenever they exceed their carrying capacity, they will be degrowing. They will be, the contraction will be following. And in this sense, degrowth is actually a systemic risk, and risks must be priced in the markets. So, and especially considering the Earth Overshoot Day will be in July this year, this is a very much reality right now, the degrowth. So the financial markets should decide whether they will take this as an ecological law and make the necessary, price the risks, or they will just let it be. But again, there is a problem, because any systematic risk needs collective action. Any company or corporation or individual, they're making effort, and proper real effort will not be enough to tackle the systemic risk. Because as it is systemic, that requires systemic action. And this is very important that the regulatory responsibility in this case. Because the regulators, normally, for example, banks are regulated for the liquidity risk, capital adequacy risk, or the contagion risk, and many other risks. And they are regulated for all of these risks. And biodiversity loss imposes all of these risks. So regulators should be used as a leverage point to make a whole industry-wide move towards a better place. Because at the moment, unfortunately, less than 1% of the companies, they report their biodiversity dependence and impact according to last IPBES Business and Biodiversity report. And also, all in all, basically, biodiversity underpins all the economic activity. Like, we built our systems and societal systems and economic system based on the intact biodiversity. And this prepares for the stability of the natural ecosystem, means stability of the economic system and social systems as well. But currently, it's unfortunately the opposite way around. The economic system is under the bottom, and then we are currently also building the social system based on the economic principles, and in the last decade or two, we are trying to integrate here and there biodiversity or climate change into this thing. And this has to shift, and biosphere needs to be placed in the bottom, and all other systems will be rising on it. And this is but also actually happening, because especially on the financial markets point of view, the last IPBES Business and Biodiversity report was, in my opinion, again, a milestone report, and that is creating the change towards the desired place. Especially right now, very, very important to reach that report to the corporations and business actors, and then let them know, take the science behind themselves, so that they can go to the board and they can show that this is a systemic risk, this is a physical risk, and this is important. We should integrate to our strategy. But also, for quite some time, central banks and also the other regulators, they are taking on it, and they have prepared a lot of different reports, and they are actively working on it, how they can implement the biodiversity into their policies as well. Like Bank of Netherlands and Bank of France, they are leading that, and also Swiss regulator FINMA is taking the lead on these ones. And so nature is finally taking their rightful place, started to take that place in the financial markets, and nature-blind finance is ending. We just need to accelerate it. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Cengiz. I think you have triggered a lot of debate in the room. I'm standing in between this debate and the coffee break. It's not a comfortable place. I think we can take one or two questions, and then we will have a short break of 15 minutes. But I don't know if some people in the room would like to react or have a question on either speaker we had beforehand. Cengiz, Paola, Amanda, Camille, and Karen. Yes. Please.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Gurbir Puller from Switzerland. I was looking for another Swiss fellow, but I couldn't find. Now I have one. Good. Thank you for that inspiring talk, and I fully share your concerns. Just a short comment. Some years back, a representative of Swiss National Bank was asked in Zurich by journalists, why does not Swiss bank invest more in green innovations, green projects? And the answer was, our mandate is the balance sheet, not the ecosystem. So that is true. And I don't have better answers to this bigger challenge. And I think we operate within the frame of the given economic system. But that does not mean that we stop questioning these things. Thank you, I very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And despite the fact we are within this bubble, the reality around of biodiversity limits remains. Cengiz, do you want to react or stay with me? And I can invite also other speakers, Paola and Amanda, if you want to join as well for a bit of exchanges.
National Bank was stating that was a very unfortunate statement, in my opinion, because a couple of years back they were backing up the Euro Swiss, and that's not their mandate really, being a backup for the European Union. But in their mandate is also like they need to foresee the developments in the economics and makes the necessary. And they were missing this report, in my opinion, and they will change their opinion, I hope, very soon.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please. I have the lady in the back and the gentleman. Okay, gentleman and then the lady.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Cengiz for your input. It comes at a very opportune time because just on the weekend, the progressive governments also called for the same thing on the reform of IMF, the UN, and all this, because this is truly what has brought us to this point. It's the humans, and the humans is the one to change it, and we shouldn't fall on a default setting to say this has been existing and it cannot be changed. I mean, for the rest of the panel, for me, I've worked quite a little bit. I'm from the National Research Foundation in South Africa, which we are part of this program. But on looking especially in nature and biodiversity, what is the role for us to hold space for communities and indigenous people then? Because sometimes I feel when we sit here and try to craft and configure some solutions, instead of us holding space and acknowledging that especially with diversity and ecology, the indigenous and local people know exactly how to balance many of these things. So how can we make sure, especially the project, go with that mind in holding space, not just to think that we have the solutions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Some of the speakers would like to react on this aspect.
Yeah, no, thanks. So you may be aware IPBES has a task force on indigenous and local knowledge. So we had 3 meetings with members of different indigenous communities throughout the assessments, and Transformative Change Assessment would have done the same. And they sort of then help us. There's also a call for knowledge on an indigenous knowledge, and it's not just restricted to written knowledge. Again, it can come in any format so that we can integrate or weave it into appropriate places in the assessment. In terms of the Nexus assessment, they really helped us because I guess Nexus thinking is just naturally embedded in many indigenous systems. So we have a lot of our case studies and response options are on indigenous systems. We had indigenous food systems exemplified in every single chapter of the Nexus assessment, and they helped us come up with a new conceptual framework that is different for every different indigenous community, but helps us bring that to the fore. And I think that is moving forwards in IPBES now, because in the second global assessment, there is a separate chapter, again, dedicated to indigenous knowledge. So again, it has always tried to foreground it and weave it into assessments, and still is trying to do that.
Just on a practical note, South Africa is one of the countries we're studying at the moment, and we'll have a report for you which will be an analysis, a gap analysis of what's been included. Okay, how biodiversity laws have been included into the national framework, and where you could improve the policy itself to be more human rights. And I think listening to especially some of your list of advice or strategies at the end, it reflects exactly around the principles of the human rights-based approach. These are already existing international laws. They should be integrated, and they are to a certain extent in most countries, but not completely. And that's where the gaps are, and where we could very easily fill some holes and help with integrating solutions. So I'll, if you want to get in touch with me, I can share that with you as soon as it's ready.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to have to close the session because we still need a bit of break before stepping into the next session. And we have to start at 3 p.m. sharp, Azores time, so it's 5 p.m. for Paris time or Brussels time. So I would like to thank all the speakers, Karen online, Camille, Cengiz, Paola, and Amanda for your inputs. And please, they are on site, presential, so during the break, don't hesitate to come up to them for further discussion. Thank you very much for your patience, and enjoy the break. Back in 15 minutes. Okay, please take a seat. We are opening the second part of this Science Policy Forum on transformative change and biodiversity, and looking into the European policy instruments to get this transformative change on the road and maybe have some transformative pathways. So I'm inviting Bénédicte Blandot, you're a policy officer working on biodiversity research and policy at the European Commission DG Environment. You have been working for several years on EU environmental and research policy, and you will be in a duo with Bastien Bertsky, policy officer also for biodiversity research at DG Research and Innovation, and also working a lot on biodiversity conservation and international organizations. Yeah, I think, Bastien, you can join here or closer as you wish. Okay, thanks a lot. Bénédicte, I let you start.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Okay, I control the slides. Yes. So we will talk today a bit about the EU policy framework and EU policy action for transformative change for biodiversity. So we won't be exhaustive. I don't think it's possible, but I will just start by recalling the policy framework and objectives and the vision and then 2030 objectives at EU level, and how that fits also with the global framework that we had already presentations on earlier, and then take a few examples that use some of the strategies, or actually multiple strategies for many of them, of transformative change as outlined in the transformative change IPBES assessment. So to start with the policy framework, it's a bit dense, but multiple elements have already been presented. The 2050 vision at EU level is set in the 8th Environmental Action Programme, which builds on the European Green Deal, and it's the 2050 vision of living well within planetary boundaries. And this translates into 6 priorities for 2030, with priorities for climate mitigation and adaptation, transition to a circular economy, the zero pollution ambition, priority for biodiversity, which is then built on by the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, and the priority of reducing environmental and climate pressures related to production and consumption. And all of these priorities are also structured with enabling conditions to reach them, which also match with the transformative change approach. So just to name a few, effective implementation and enforcement, the just transition dimension, the gender perspective, the One Health approach, harnessing the digital transition, the global dimension, the use also of best scientific available evidence, and mainstreaming of biodiversity action. And so before going a bit into the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, this is mainstreamed in different policies and strategies, and we can notably mention the landmark EU climate law, which sets the binding target of climate neutrality by 2050 with intermediary targets, and the EU climate adaptation strategy, the zero pollution action plan, which I've already mentioned, and the circular economy action plan. But going into the EU Biodiversity Strategy is structured around 4 pillars, as you can see: protecting nature, restoring nature, enabling transformative change, and then the global dimension. And in the global dimension, the EU led on the post-2020 framework, which resulted in the global biodiversity framework. And since we can also mention the High Seas Treaty, so the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, which was also adopted and more recently entered into force. So for more details, because today I promise I will try to be short, but you can look also at the EU Biodiversity Strategy dashboard to look at progress to target with indicators that were developed for the different targets, and also the EU reporting to the CBD on progress to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework from February, which can, with an overview section to show the progress. So now just an update also on the Commission priority with the 2024-2029 Commission priorities and how transformative change for biodiversity fits in. We have 3 objectives for free and democratic Europe, a strong and secure Europe, a prosperous and competitive Europe, which are then translated into 7 priorities. And biodiversity is mostly framed in the priorities on a new plan for Europe's sustainable prosperity and competitiveness, and the priorities on sustaining our quality of life, food security, water, and nature. But is also, of course, relevant across priorities. And I've just listed a few here of the most relevant policy developments for biodiversity, but I also wanted to mention that the need to stay on the course of the European Green Deal and deliver on the objectives of the European Green Deal is mentioned, and the need to focus on implementation and incentives to reach those goals, and ensure we reach the international commitments which are aligned with those goals. And then some of the specific developments under the priorities for quality of life. We had the water resilience strategy, which was adopted and includes, is structured in 3 sections on restoring and protecting the water cycle, building a water smart economy, ensuring access to clean and affordable sanitation for all, and the Ocean Pact as a comprehensive strategy for EU policy and action for the ocean, and with a goal to better protect the ocean. And under the priority of a new plan for Europe's sustainable prosperity and competitiveness, the Clean Industrial Deal was adopted to accelerate decarbonization, focusing on harder to decarbonize sectors and clean tech, and acceleration on the transition to the circular economy is also included with an upcoming Circular Economy Act. And then I just included some other elements to show how biodiversity is relevant still across priorities. So, of course, being a major element for resilience, but also for strategic autonomy. And we have an example with the EU preparedness strategy, where the recently adopted communication on integrated wildfire management shows how restoration is also a part of this, and preventative landscape restoration to diminished risk of wildfire and also the post-recovery restoration. And also some enabling transformative change elements that are relevant across the different priorities, so the work with stakeholders, the implication of youth. And we have also here, as an example, the EU intergenerational strategy, intergenerational fairness strategy, sorry about this, which aims to ensure that the rights of future generations are protected, and this includes the right to a healthy environment and healthy planet. But going into some examples, I wanted to highlight the nature restoration regulation. It's a key element of the EU biodiversity strategy, and it's really a landmark legislation and binding legislation, which is also stressed in the transformative change agreement assessment, as one of the strategies for transformative change. It aims to restore a broad road of degraded ecosystems. You can see the objectives here, contributing also to climate mitigation and adaptation, land degradation neutrality, food security, and meeting the EU's international commitments, and sets the overarching commitment of putting restoration measures on 20% of the EU's land and sea by 2030, and all ecosystems in need of restoration by 2050. As well as a series of specific targets for different ecosystems and also protected habitats, which is a target based on existing legislation, pollinators, and a target for river connectivity. Another example is the biodiversity mainstreaming. So I was talking about biodiversity mainstreaming in policies, but there's also biodiversity mainstreaming in the EU programs and the budget. So this is in the interinstitutional agreement. The biodiversity mainstreaming annual spending target was of 7.5% in 2024 and needs to be of 10% for 2026 and 2027. And you can see here the tracking of this biodiversity contribution and the main sources of EU finances for biodiversity, which are under the Common Agricultural Policy, Cohesion Policy funds, and also some other relevant instruments include Horizon Europe, which is also through which we are co-funding Biodiversa Plus, Invest EU, LIFE, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and more. And then I added here a bubble on Horizon Europe. As for Horizon Europe, the spending target was not quite reached under the work program for 2026-2027. So to ensure the commitment is reached for Horizon Europe of reaching the 10% spending target, an additional horizontal biodiversity call is in preparation as part of the 2027 amendment of the work program. And then to finish on an example for innovative finance, I just mentioned the mainstreaming in the budget and the scaled up of EU biodiversity spending. And we know that public finance is essential and needs to remain, but it cannot bridge the biodiversity finance gap alone. You have here the estimation for the EU of 37.4 billion a year gap that remains. And so the Commission adopted a communication on an EU roadmap towards nature credit in July to incentivize private investments into actions that protect and preserve nature and reward those who undertake these actions. The aim is to complement other sources of nature finance and support the development of high integrity tools. So nature credits need to be nature positive actions with verified outcomes for biodiversity, be science-based, high integrity, and they will also need to be EU aligned to fit into different policies, value existing standards, and link to existing schemes, and there will be a new financial tool part of a larger toolbox. I will accelerate as Bastian will now go into the EU research and innovation policy and how this supports transformative change for biodiversity. But just to finish, so far the work has started, exploratory work on nature credits with an expert group on nature credits, which has been set up. And I will leave the word to Bastian.
Good afternoon also from my side, all of you. I guess we could have a whole conference on leveraging EU policy and funding instruments and mechanisms and how they support transformative change for biodiversity, but we have limited time and it's just all 5 minutes for me left. So I have to be quick, but let's focus in a bit on the research and innovation policy and funding that from the EU we have for transformative change for biodiversity and also bigger transformative changes that need to happen. And here I focus, I think, a bit on Horizon Europe, the current framework program first, where we had about 7 billion for biodiversity-related research and innovation in total. This is coming to an end over there. You're absolutely right. Sorry, wrong button. No, again, wrong button. There you go. Look, and it's the benefit of it is that you see my nice yellow highlighting. Excuse that, please, but it helps me. Maybe my age. But so, and with the Horizon Europe framework program, we really made a huge effort to supporting the implementation of the European Green Deal, the biodiversity strategy, the nature restoration law, IPBES, and the global biodiversity framework and other international commitments. And that I think is pretty neat and strong, and has shown also that we're linking up these different research innovation actions with the policy instruments and the research needs that they have. The center of gravity within Horizon Europe for transformative change for biodiversity really is on Cluster 6, which is about transformative change of the EU economy and society. But there's many other areas in Horizon Europe which also support relevant, I think, research and innovation. Worth mentioning are the EU missions here, which were introduced in Horizon Europe as a new mechanism, and we have 5 of those, and 2 of them are particularly relevant for biodiversity conservation and restoration. This is Restore Our Oceans and Ocean and Waters and the Soil Deal for Europe. We have the European partnerships that we all love so much, including Biodiversa Plus, but also other partnerships on agroecology, now a new one on forests and sustainable forestry, on blue economy, and you name it, over 50 of them in total. We have also a very big portfolio of projects which are covering a wide range of biodiversity-related issues, from genomics, taxonomy, to monitoring, to protection, restoration, but also beyond that, nature-based solutions, cross-sectoral transitions, nature-positive economy, and not all of them with a very direct, close link to biodiversity, but all, I think, relevant in this context, citizen science as well, and often targeting root causes, seeking to transform governance or helping to transform governance, scaling solutions, and so on. And we have this interesting evolving cluster of research and innovation projects that specifically work on biodiversity, on transformative change for biodiversity, and they're funded through the different work programs, and that we will continue to fund and support. And in a way, I think the BiodivTransform projects add an additional interesting dimension to that, and should also seek to link up and pick up on these existing transformative change projects. And last but not least, we have this additional horizontal biodiversity call, which is yet to be published and is very exciting also because it is actually going across all clusters and not just focusing traditionally on the cluster 6. Let me just get the buttons right here. Okay. Now I will focus in on a few of these elements quickly. I have 3 minutes left or something like that, maybe 2, let's say. Give me 3. We have this cluster of transformative change projects, which in a sense are about 40 projects from Horizon 2020, still Horizon Europe, plus many more also funded by the European Research Council that deal with transformative change-related issues. Most of them, or all of them actually, address in a way also knowledge gaps identified either in the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment or other IPBES assessments. And this has to do with the fact that we have really been using the IPBES assessments from the past decade to inform what we think we should be funding with EU research and innovation funding, and have actually used them as a basis for our programming of the research topics. And this also has helped us to ensure that these topics, but also then the projects, of course, that address these topics, help science, policy, and society to co-create transformative pathways. So they help us also building the knowledge, innovation, and governance base that we need to transform how people value, conserve, restore, and use nature. And that is, of course, a direct link also to the 2050 vision. And importantly, also for the people I think in the room, they are not just focused on the EU, on the European continent, mainland. They work also in Africa with African researchers and partners and stakeholders and communities in Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, and with indigenous peoples globally. I skipped this one, but it will be in the slide deck. So, and this is actually just one of the areas in which we work, and showing a link between the IPBES knowledge gaps relating to capacity building for transformative change, and where we have a range of projects addressing many exciting topics. And some of them are coming to an end now. They will actually have a final conference in Brussels in June. And it's very great, I think, to be here and to see also that now we have these new projects starting funded by Biodiversa Plus, co-funded by the Commission, that will hopefully pick up some of these findings and knowledge needs and research gaps identified also by previous projects. I will finish with 2 slides on the current and future. So we have, yes, thank you, great. It's a bit of a challenging, sorry. I skipped this one. Anyway, no problem. I can show it you tonight if you want again. In the work program 26-27, so the one that has been adopted and published, and many of you will have seen this, and some of these topics calls have actually gone out already. Some might have even closed already. We had a series of very interesting topics dealing with integrated scenarios and prediction models, biodiversity in the private sector, scaling up evidence-based, nature-based solutions, living labs, driving transformative change. And what I think is interesting and what I try to highlight, they're all framed or also now in the context of transitions, transformative change. So we really want these research and innovation projects to look at specific topics in the context of how what they deliver in terms of solutions, what they test, can make a difference for enabling transformative change. And a bit of a sneak preview, as we mentioned, there will be this additional horizontal call to ensure that we will meet the 10% spending target. And again, here we'll be looking at some concrete leverage points, testing evidence-based interventions, applying a systemic Nexus approach, learning from the different IPBES assessments, bringing it all together and helping us to make better policies and implementation of policies. And last slide, so looking beyond 27, actually, towards the next multi-annual financial framework, 28-34, which is our big EU budget. It will be even more ambitious, and it sounds like a lot, 2 trillion euros. This is not all for biodiversity, of course. It would be nice, even though it wouldn't close the funding gap that was just mentioned earlier today. But still, it's a lot of money, but a lot of that money will hopefully also do some good for the environment, for the climate. And I'm just going to highlight, Bastian. I'm not learning. No, sorry. There, exactly. Yeah. It's just like, whew. Anyway, there it is. Last slide. No more clicks. I stop it. The important thing here, maybe the take-home message, is that in the green box, so also this new budget as proposed by the Commission last year in June, which of course, is now subject to the discussion in the Council with the Member States, the Parliament, and will still change, I think, in many ways. Maybe we'll get less money and the priorities will shift a bit. But importantly, the way we proposed it, there is an ambitious 35% green spending target for climate and environment, which would mean 700 billion, from this budget. And we aim to better align climate resilience and environmental measures, which hasn't worked so well always in the past. There's also clearly in the proposal the goal to have a better monitoring system and better monitoring of EU spending and results in this area, so that actually we can show that we deliver on these green objectives. And we will continue to apply the do no significant harm principle, which means that no EU funding should actually do any significant harm to the climate and biodiversity and environmental objectives. And last but not least, last point, Horizon Europe, the next one will still be hopefully a standalone program with twice the budget compared to the current one, and will be simpler, faster, and more impactful even. So is that not music to your ears? Yay! So yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you. Thank you for listening to us.
Well, thank you to both for trying to keep it in a very short time with the amount of information you had to convey. Thanks a lot. What I suggest is that online you actually collect any questions for Bastien and Benedict on some specific aspect. And on site, I see we can take 1 or 2 questions, but very quickly. And then I suggest Bastien and Benedict are staying for dinner. So just catch them if you have specific questions. I'll take your question, please. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Since this is a science policy forum, I was hoping for a bit of an exchange between science and policy. And I think what you presented is a portfolio of policy actions that the EU is doing in the area of biodiversity. I'm wondering whether in preparation for this presentation or any time after the Transformative Change and Nexus assessment, your teams have reflected on the assessments with the view of refining those policy actions so that they could be more transformative. Mm-hmm. If so, what challenges have you encountered? If not, can we do this better? Because what the assessments have shown is that we are not doing transformative change at the moment. So maybe it is, and here is my suggestion, then maybe at least let's stop using word transformative for things that are perpetuating what we have been doing so far.
Okay. So,
you can start.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that will get the discussion started over dinner, I guess, and many drinks tonight. No, I mean, look, I mean, I think one thing important to recognize is, of course, there are time lags involved, and not only at the EU level, which is very big and heavy, but also at national levels, global levels, and so on. So I think some of these assessments are still quite recent. What I can say, and also being a member of the EU delegation to IPBES meetings, we take these assessments as soon as they are adopted, and we are starting the follow-up. We have had events in Brussels already, even on the business and biodiversity assessment, you know, and actually it's not only us, it's the other policy DGs which really need to listen, right? And so we try to bring them together, look at the key findings. It was last week only that we had a meeting in our building with people from different DGs looking at the key findings from the business and biodiversity assessment, only adopted like 2 months ago, and trying to make sense of that and how we can use that in our EU policy making. Now we invited over 80 colleagues, maybe 20 came out of all the different policy DGs, maybe we had 5 there, and still those colleagues, I think, will struggle a bit until they manage to apply the assessment. I guess you all know this story, you know, in different administrations and so on, but we're trying. We had events with the parliament in Brussels as well on this, and some of the IPBES co-chairs and co-authors came to Brussels or remotely participated in this, and we are very grateful that the IPBES chair came to Brussels. So I think we're trying, and we are fully aware that, you know, there is a lot more that can be done, that progress is too slow, too small, and some of these policies, they only get re-evaluated every 5 or 7 or 8 years or whatever, and then we have just missed a chance on something as big maybe as a common agricultural policy, and we have to wait for the next reform. But it's not that we're not, I think, trying or wanting to try, but you're absolutely right. I mean, not everything that maybe, you know, on paper sounds like contributes to transformative change now does already, or should be labeled as transformative change. Fully agree with that. Thank you.
Benedict, you want to add something on this aspect?
Just quickly, yes, and I mean, we wanted to also be positive in the presentation, but of course, if you look also on the tracker of the EU Biodiversity Dashboard and also the EU report to the CBD and so on, you can see that in many cases, I mean, we know that biodiversity continues to degrade, and also the progress is not fast enough for many of the targets and so on. So this is also why we recognize the need that basically we have the legislative framework in place, but we need to really step up the implementation. And this is also how we have, I mean, you explained in the research and innovation policy how the gaps were taken on, and so this is also where we're trying to have this come in on to be able to really step up this implementation with the use of living labs and so on. So that we are trying to answer on this as well.
Thanks a lot for your very honest answer. Also working in an institution where you have a lot of constraints. So doing the best you can, I guess, where you are. Okay. Any final question? Yes, please.
With the new policy framework that absorbs, for example, the LIFE program into a broader category, what can be done to guard against a sort of dilution effect where biodiversity is no longer really being funded, or these biodiversity-oriented projects are being funded?
I mean, life activities are still in the proposals for the EU Competitiveness Fund, so we are still continuing with life activities even without the program itself. And I missed the second part of your question, I think. I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
Well, I guess it was related to not losing the funding that was targeted to biodiversity within those life activities, as they are now more diluted in some ways.
I mean, they're still included.
Okay. Okay. Well, keep up some of the questions for dinner. I'm sure that Bénédicte and Bastien will be happy to try to answer also the different questions more specific to your projects or to your context. And thanks a lot, Bastien and Bénédicte, and thanks for coming, because I know it is a struggle for European civil servants nowadays to travel and be part of the meeting. So thanks a lot for doing it. I would like now to open another session, and I'm going to call for the first panel members to join me. So Isabelle, Mariana, and Cengiz, if you can join for this first panel. And while they are joining, why don't you all stand up a little bit for a little stretch, because I see the postures are like, it's kind of going into the depths of the very, very comfortable seats, maybe too comfortable. Stretch a bit. We are setting up the panel together. Up to you. You're going to have some microphones. Okay. So, good stretch, a bit of stretch. Okay. Your brain has been activated again for some listening to this very interesting panel. Okay. Thanks a lot. I see some people in the back who have like some lots of energy to share. Okay, so actually the panels are meant to be a bit more forum-like, as we noticed that. So to have more of personal inputs. And I'm going to introduce each of you. Well, Cengiz, we have already had a bit of your experience. And then ask a few questions. And then I will turn to you if you want also to interact and ask questions to the panelists, okay? So the first panel is actually tackling one subject that was in the first session quite important, around navigating the tensions when we talk about transformative change and biodiversity, social justice, backlashes, potential also impacts for the change makers. So I'm going to first introduce our speakers. So Cengiz, we know you are from University of Zurich, and that you are this bridge between finances and research on ecology, and that you look into other indicators than GDP to take in consideration biodiversity in the economics. Isabelle Bell, so you work at the Global Landscapes Forum, acting as the regional coordinator of the forum activities in Latin America and the Caribbean. And you have a lot of experience in the environmental field, working very closely with indigenous peoples and grassroots organizations, so you will bring also this perspective in the discussion. And your background is in anthropology and also climate change discussions, so you have also this very nice double profile in the discussion. And Mariana Walter, so you are an assistant professor and researcher at the Institute Barcelona Estudis International. I think I will let you say it. With so background in ecological economics and political ecology, so also bringing this different perspective and looking into the research on socio-environmental conflicts and the role of civil society actors. And I think this is the core of this panel, is how do we actually implement this transformative change, but at which costs and with which risks. And so I wanted to maybe start quickly with Cengiz, as you are also sitting next to me. Looking at what we discussed, we have seen that there is a lot of potential conflicts between different sectors when we talk about transformative change. And having worked for 20 years at a science policy interface, mainstreaming biodiversity in those different sectors hasn't really worked out right now. So from your perspectives, well, what could be a transformative way to mainstream biodiversity and to implement this transformative change?
It's a really difficult question because that's also my experience. Like, it's very difficult to mainstream the biodiversity, but I think what is most needed, especially concerning the energy sector, the holistic approach that just not separating the climate change from the biodiversity loss or biodiversity from the climate, and tackle both twin crises together. And this is, of course, not so easy, but it is really, really needed because they both requires urgent action. But for that, of course, there are a lot of nature-based solutions proposed, etc. But I think what needs to be done is really, rather than nature-based solutions, nature-based economy. Like, the principles of the economic system must change. Because as I was mentioning in my talk, like currently we have the economic system, and then we really built for decades long around the societal system, around the economic system, and like we shaped the society with those principles, and that is, of course, a very, very big problem to tackle this problem, to tackle this issue. And when there are writers who has been writing it for very, very long time, like Erich Fromm has a book about the sane society, how the economic principles has been shaping the society since 1950s, 1960s, 70s. And based on that, in the last couple of decades, we are really trying to integrate biodiversity or climate or environmental issues here and there. But this really needs to shift. Like, we need to build an economic system and understanding based on the principle that the continuity of our lives, including the economic lives and like the societal life and every aspect of our lives, based on the intact nature. Without that, we are going to be losing the business continuity, but also the societal, any progress we have ever done until now. So with this recognition, in my opinion, that we might turn the tide.
But it's a bit like facing a wall without really understanding how to climb it, go around, go under. And what I wanted to ask you, maybe Mariana, is around the ones who are trying to trigger the change. So who are the change makers? How can we move from this idea of, well, we need to change the economic system and so on? What are the forces actually right now who are trying to do it? And who are they? At what cost are they doing it? What can be done also to support them?
Thank you. Also a challenging question.
Yeah, I love challenging questions. Why would we have a panel otherwise?
Exactly. Well, I have more questions maybe, but I think the question of the agents is a critical question. No? We are talking about transformative change as a whole of society process, but who are these agents? So if we review all the literature that has been published about what are the key actors on transformative change, how many of these publications do you think are mentioning some actors from civil society? Give me a percentage. How many? 20%. Who goes up or down? Down. Down depends. So 30% of scientific publications talking about key actors in transformative change mention some civil society actors, such as individual, basically. But if you think about social mobilization, social movements, NGOs, it's less than 1%. So we are missing an important reflection about the role of these actors in transformative change. So when we are thinking about civil society or social organizations, indigenous communities, foundations, unions, volunteers, there's a wide range of critical actors that actually are having a crucial role, putting in practice, rethinking transformative change. And we are not giving them the role they could have when we think, when we do research, when we develop policy for transformative change. Actually, Scholarly and policy attention when considering biodiversity conservation has largely centered on large international conservation organizations, which continue to hold a privileged position in global negotiations and policy spaces. So maybe we need to give space to other actors. There's other possible approaches to conservation, such as convivial conservation. Maybe some of you know these different approaches, where we emphasize radical equity, structural transformation, and environmental justice that remain marginal when we now currently think about conservation. So we need to give more recognition to these other actors, social actors that are key in transformations. We developed research with some colleagues where we analyzed 2,900 social mobilization against polluting activities from 1992 to 2022, and we found surprising results. We analyzed the Environmental Justice Atlas dataset, but maybe you know, that I'm also part of. And what we found is that about 40% of socio-environmental mobilizations occur within the top 30% of global priority lands for species conservation. These are mobilizations resisting mining, resisting industrial agriculture, resisting different forms of pollution. So these movements are in the frontier of expansion of these economic growth activities, defending their territories, becoming key actors for biodiversity conservation. Maybe using different words, maybe they don't talk in terms of biodiversity conservation, but they are doing this, defending their territories, their living spaces. The other thing that we found is that these mobilizations contribute to the achievement of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework targets, focused on ecosystem protection, restoration, sustainable use, and inclusive spatial planning. So they are key actors we found in the research. However, we also found something that is highly concerning that Karen O'Brien mentioned this morning, is that 1/3 of these mobilizations face repression, criminalization, among other forms of violence. And these diverse forms of violence are moreover more common in high biodiversity conservation areas. So there's high violence against these mobilizations, even higher in high biodiversity areas. So we also found that there are disproportionately high levels of violence against environmental defenders, particularly indigenous groups, and Isabel will tell us more about them, in Latin America, Africa, East Asia, where conflicts are often tied to agribusiness and mining activities. And mining activities are now this key frontier because they have also been linked with these green growth and decarbonization agendas and require specific attention, and maybe we can talk more about that. So it's important to note that many socio-environmental mobilizations operate within their own normative framework and agendas, often grounded in principles of ecological justice or resistant to state-led conservation initiatives, and do not necessarily align a priori with conventional conservation goals or the Kunming framework. Nevertheless, when they oppose environmentally destructive activities, their actions contribute directly to biodiversity protection. So this is a call to, in research and policy, rethink how we engage with these actors and we value their role in conservation.
Thanks a lot, Mariana. Actually, maybe jumping on one of the questions you raised around another type of domination that can still be up right now, which is with biodiversity conservation actions, especially with big international organizations. And maybe, Belle, if you want to comment a little bit on, sometimes biodiversity conservation can even be counterproductive to transformative change when it's facing the needs of the people who are trying to protect their territory and resources. So if you can, it's not an easy subject because usually we don't like to have that put on the table, but research has to be also aware of this kind of aspects. Please.
So I'm gonna share a few examples just to illustrate that on conservation policies. In Brazil, for instance, a while ago, we had the protected areas policy, so to preserve biodiversity. And those defined areas were areas where no human activity was allowed. But these, for local communities and indigenous peoples meant a loss because they basically need resources to live. What they fail to understand is that despite those communities and peoples use this territory, they will not destroy it because they have another practices, different practices. And it's very important to learn their worldviews to understand why they do such things. For example, I used to work with an indigenous group from North Brazil, and they had a conception that each living being had a specific god to look after them. So in case they would kill a lot of a specific animal or cut a lot of a specific tree, get too many fish, they would offend this god, and he would have a revenge on them. So they had a set of rules to hunt and to open their farms or to do anything to ensure that the animals or trees were protected for the least and keep a balance. That is really also a view that, unlike what we saw, does not pose a hierarchy between people and nature. They, as all the living beings, they also had their god. Everyone was in the same level. So that's why they had a deep respect for it. And the other example I would like to mention is the importance of us really, when using a concept or an idea that comes from an indigenous worldview, that we are very aware of the meaning of that, the real meaning of that. And it's very hard to grasp because you need years to fully understand a worldview, if you can. So for example, we have Bolivia and Ecuador with constitutions that recognize the rights of nature, and Pachamama, which is beautiful, it's beautifully written. But those countries did not adopt different model. They are still countries that rely on an extractivist economic model. And that clashes directly with that. So it's really like emptying a concept and just using it to build a nice image, but unfortunately does not reflect the reality.
And just to dig in a bit on how do you see, for example, in research or in other settings, how do you see maybe inclusive dialogue processes? What could be a governance that is conflict sensitive? I mean, how do you see the tools and methods and processes that could address or at least engage differently with these actors?
Not by inviting a representative to talk for 10 minutes here to start with, no. I think it would be very rich and valuable if more of us would be open to actually be with one community or one indigenous group in their territory where they are the people, the experts. They are the people who know it better. So we can actually put ourselves in this place. I think it's very oppressive that we invite indigenous representatives or local communities representatives to join the events that are framed in our logics and ask them to properly make recommendations. I think this is like, it doesn't work like that. So I think the first thing needed to have an inclusive dialogue is for us to, one, be a bit more humble, but also always question ourselves about what we are doing. Are we open to a whole different logics and a whole different set of assumptions? Especially for research, I see that we always come with our own assumptions, right? And it's very hard to detach from that. But as much as we do it, then the best. So I would highly recommend people to maybe start doing things differently. If you want to do a research with an indigenous people, maybe you can invite an indigenous researcher or someone that has experience, a background with that particular community that can help you navigate and understand that better. Because sometimes I see researchers that say that we will include indigenous knowledge by interviews or by surveys or by meetings, workshops, and this is not enough.
It's not the ways actually that they would choose to interact.
Exactly.
And that's imposing also some methodologies that are our zones of comfort, not their zones of comfort. I don't know, Mariana, do you want to also react on what could be done? Or definitely, maybe the next Science Policy Forum should be organized differently. But from your experience, what are the tools that you think have proved to be useful, especially as you have researchers who might want to engage differently also?
I was thinking about what Isabel was saying, and I think we have to be careful not to enter in an extractive research approach where we engage with indigenous. And actually, I'm seeing how indigenous scholars are refusing to enter in research projects when they feel like there's this mandate, no? We have to have. So it's about a profound transformation, because to engage in an honest conversation. I really like the concept proposed in Latin America by Paulo Freire about the diálogo de saberes, no? Dialogue of knowledge, where we recognize the value of different value systems, of different values, and we engage in a dialogue, which is not about creating these hierarchies, but recognizing the value of engaging with it. And the question is, as researchers, how do we change the way we do research, considering this? And sometimes it enters in tension with some of the ways projects are also, I mean, we are supposed to write projects, no? This is also a challenge we have when we do research. And when we design projects, how do we allow for this dialogue, this interaction of different knowledges, different actors that maybe produce something that is not expected or requires long processes of research? And this is a big challenge. Engaging with indigenous communities is not just going and doing research. It's, as Isabel has been doing for decades, is working with them through time, building a relation of trust, a relation of co-production of knowledge, giving and receiving. It's a two-way research. So I think we need to rethink how we do research, co-producing knowledge with local actors, publishing with all these actors as well. Is the way we publish, the way we write, the way we design engagement with local communities in their places. So I think there's a lot we can do, but the good thing is that we have a lot of experience from a broad community of researchers and engaged researchers about nice experiences. So maybe how do we design projects and develop them, allowing for that dialogue of knowledges, value systems. It's something that we have
learning from your experience, learning from also, I would say, different processes that are ongoing right now. I like the fact you discussed long-term relationship. Sometimes it's something that is complicated with research because it's both longer term to provide results and very short to engage with people and disappear.
No, or you produce
so
things.
There is a trade-off between
and
those
also
two aspects.
you give, and maybe you don't give back in the way that science schemes will value, no? So you're investing a lot of time in maybe supporting local groups in certain processes that maybe will not produce the scientific publications you're expected to produce. So you also invest in this long-term co-production, building this relation of trust, maybe don't receiving what will be valued by institutions, your funding institutions and so on.
Indeed, evaluation then of the products, of the scientific products, have to evolve as well.
Now there's a bit of change with valuing social impact, no? But depending who understands how social impact is assessed may also differ. So I think it's an impersonal engagement with a long-term process that is unexpected in a way. But I think it's something I think we have to do. It's a commitment as researchers to produce social change and support vulnerable groups and marginalized groups. But it's a challenge also as researchers to keep it like honest and as horizontal as we can, which is not, it's a big challenge all the time. So we have to be reflexive through all the process. Reflexivity, of course, is a key element. But we do what we can, right, with the resources we have, with the constraints we have. But I think we have to ask ourselves these questions as we go.
Self-reflective process all the time. Cengiz, do you want to react to the discussion also on these aspects in relation to your own research? And I will open the floor to questions afterwards, so if you want to prepare some interactions as well, discussion. Cengiz?
Like in my own research, I mean, like we are all working around the similar projects, similar topics. Like in my research, I try to go understand the human economic activity beyond the GDP. And to do that, I developed a new methodology based on the light pollution, because whenever there's a light pollution, there is human activity. And if I take out the settlements from that light pollution, you basically end up with some kind of light source that is artificial, but nobody is living there. So it gives you an idea where are the industrial activities going on in the world. Once you have that, basically you go beyond the many deficiencies of the GDP, such as price-based metric that is not objective, and then like the spatial resolution is really terrible. Like you receive one number for a huge region, and also like that is basically not including the shadow economy, etc. So you overcome a lot of different problems with that. And what is the main thing is, with this approach, you have a map of the human activity. And then once you have that map, you can relate that mathematically to another map, let's say any ecological process. So I'm running this research at the moment in the Arctic. But so what I have found, like the fire occurrence, for example, is a huge issue in the Arctic. And it's 2.5 times more likely when there's human activity, and not just climate. And also, like the vegetation changes are significantly impacted by the human activities. But the one interesting aspect is what we see based on the light pollution map. The majority of the activity in the Arctic, more than 40% of it, is coming from oil and gas extraction. And basically 3 regions in the Russian Arctic is responsible from more than 40% of the Arctic light pollution, which is really, and the amount of land they occupy is around size of the Germany. So it's really, like these are some of the externalities where we really need to integrate into economic understanding. And of course, as well with the other discussion, like the mining especially, like many Arctic communities, they are also complaining about the green colonialism. Like the Western companies, they're coming there and building renewable projects on their land, like Sami Parliament, they were announcing a couple of years back, like these wind projects are in our land and in our reindeer grazing, and they were saying like this is green colonialism because you can do it in your land, you know. And but again, like that's why I was also saying like that really needs to be a holistic approach. But all in all, like I'm sure we all feel like things are very tough and like things are really like difficult. But I try to always say to myself, like I try to remind myself always the Silent Spring and Rachel Carson and what she was doing, like because like. She, with her own research, with her own writings, she created the change, like tangible change. And I think that's a very, very good example. I'm sure we all feel sometimes desperate, like, oh my God, I don't want to watch the news, etc. But there are examples that has been done before, and I think we can do it again. And like I try to take that into
message of hope for taking the next steps as well. I'd like to thank you, and maybe we can turn to the room if you have some reactions or questions to our panelists as well. I'll be happy to take them. Yes, please. There's no more microphones.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Gurpreet Bhullar. I think, Marina, you very rightly said the future and science policy forum could be done differently because we are at the intersection of science policy, spirituality, and philosophy. So, I enjoyed this discussion. which is a kind of challenging the global narrative and discourse set by some powerful individuals. Like Noah Harari says that we are at the verge of becoming gods, so Homo Deus, if you have read. And the richest man on the planet says everything will be done by the robots and people should get universal income. So I consider actors like us as marginalized hippies on this discourse. But I mean, again, personally, I support this idea. The crux is, I think, that the whole of modern science is rooted in the Industrial Revolution, which places a higher value on material evidence and empirical evidence and negates the experiential evidence. And what we brought with the examples of the indigenous communities, that is more experiential knowledge. And what we can, as actors in this game, can do to highlight more the value of experiential evidence and find the ways how we can substantiate that evidence, that it gains weight. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Well, for the marginalized hippies, how do you actually empower this experiential evidence and make it more than just marginalized? Do you have some ideas or reactions to that?
Yeah, just to react on the last part, I think it's we could act as translators if possible. So like trying to build a bridge between these lived experience and worldview and this world of abstraction. So that would be a way, and also stepping a bit back to value this knowledge. Because if you think of the Amazon, for instance, that forest was built and managed by the people who were there, spreading seeds in their day-to-day activities. And there it was when the Portuguese came. So I think it's important to acknowledge those things and the whole knowledge that is behind such practices. So I really do think that we should try to act more as translators.
Mariana?
You will have
yeah,
to,
you
right?
will have to
say something. No, I just want to say that I think we can do different things, but there are initiatives globally that are trying to document and make visible and share experiences of transformation. And I can suggest one, which is called the Tapestry of Alternatives, which is actually from social organizations that want to share different transformative experiences. And these are born from Asia, and now they are being shared also with Latin America and other countries. So maybe what I can say, I find more inspiring processes from the grassroots than maybe from what we produce as scientists. So from my perspective, we have a lot to learn about how they think differently, they approach differently, they build networks and share, and maybe we can support in different ways, producing robust science, but also supporting and making visible and understanding more their own experiences and processes. But maybe I want to say, maybe aligning with previous presentations, is that limits exist and we are approaching really fast. So this is creating already conversations that were impossible maybe a decade ago about the need even in Europe to reduce some forms of consumption, even the international energy agencies talking about certain urgent measures and so on. And this is because we are already at the limits. The UN resource panel says that if we keep our ongoing extraction and consumption trends of materials, in 2060, we will be consuming 60% more materials than in 2020. This has no precedent in humanity, how fast we are going in extracting and consuming materials. So in a way, these limits are really serious, but also are creating new opportunities for conversation, and opportunities to produce changes in different spheres. So I think there's an opportunity that comes from a very bad scenario, but that we have to take it and open new conversations, new questions. No, do we need to consume so much? How can we consume less? Is our well-being really tied to consumption or something different, like friendships, our social relations? All these questions are critical and urgent, and I think we can have them. And I think we can show that a certain way of degrowing is socially desirable.
Mm-hmm. Cengiz?
I mean, I totally agree with both Belle and Mariana. And what I can add is also like I think it's really important to integrate art and science together, because science, like, you know, giving the facts and facts only rarely changes and things. But when you give it in a way that you can move the emotions of the people, like I was giving an example, Rachel Carson, she made the change by saying that spring was silent, like we didn't hear the sound of the birds. Like I think we also need to be more creative how we are communicating our science, and it is really key to not to going beyond sticking to the scientific facts, but also going beyond there and also moving the emotions through art, I think, is the best way.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Actually, it's a very nice way to close the discussion, because we're going to have to move on. I really would like to thank you for a very sincere and opening mind way of explaining things from your perspective, each of you, and also for the audience to have engaged with us in this panel. Thanks a lot. And maybe next time we transform the Science Policy Forum in something different. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we have now another panel. Actually, the idea is to close with some reflections from representatives of the projects of the BiodivTransform call. So we have a few representatives who were invited to join this panel and kind of reflect on what they have heard and the perspective from their project as well on what has been discussed today. So I will call the second panel participants. Just give me a minute. You can stretch again while I'm looking for my paper. Okay. So we have, David will be online, but we have Maya, Tillman, Annette, and Lol. If you can join me on stage. And I will take the opportunity as you join me to give a very short introduction for each of you. So Maya, you're a professor of socio-ecological system science at the Stockholm Resilience Center, where you lead an interdisciplinary team that collaborates to study processes of adaptive and transformative change. May I have your attention, please? I feel a bit alone here.
People are still stretching. Yeah, exactly.
They are stretching still, huh? Okay, stop stretching. Come back to me. So I was going to finish my presentation of Maya. So Maya, yes, thank you. So yeah, your expertise is really on the interdisciplinarity. You represent here the project MultiDiff. So just to have a quick 1-minute pitch on your project, Maya, MultiDiff. Can you give us a very short intro to the project?
Sure. Shall I use this?
Yeah.
Is it on? Yes, okay, perfect. So the MultiDiff project really tries to develop new conceptualizations and understandings of biodiversity grounded in process relational philosophy, so really centering relations going beyond the separation of humans and nature, and really see diversity as emergent and situated in particular contexts. So by focusing on relations as drivers as transformative change, we want to see whether we can find different ways to govern biodiversity and ways to transform governance towards this.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to ask the side conversations to move out of the room because this is a bit disturbing. Magnus and Heiner. Thank you. The Biodiversa people, huh? Okay, so Annette and Lol, you're representing the same project, Sketch. So Annette, if I may, you are also an interdisciplinary marine scientist at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research in Bremen, in Germany. You're co-leading the program area on social impacts, and you're also head of the working group on transformation through transdisciplinarity. And I will introduce you as well, Lol, and then I can ask you to have a quick introduction of your project. So Lol, you are a postdoctoral researcher with Annette, working on the Sketch project at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research. And your background is in oceanography and sustainable fisheries management, and your current research interests are in the intersection of sustainable coastal and marine human-nature relations. So, Sketch, which one of you give a 1-minute pitch?
I'll do that quickly, I think. And advancing tomorrow a little bit already, 1 minute. Sketch is short for looking at social ecological keystone places as a concept to look at safeguarding biodiversity from a different angle. So what does safeguarding actually mean? For whom? Who benefits? And with this concept of social ecological keystone places and the way places, as far as they can be defined, that have ecological value as well as different social values, and are combined and cannot be separated, as well as the relatedness that Maya already pointed out.
Okay, thank you very much. Lloyd, you want to add on the Sketch something? No? Tilman? So Tilman Hertz, actually you come from the international development world with a focus, I'm going to sit because I don't feel comfortable looking like that, with a focus on environment and climate change. And so you're representing the project Lever. Okay, and you returned to academia as a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Center, and so you're drawing on this background in international development, philosophy, and working on transformative change in complex adaptive systems in the framework of different inter- and transdisciplinary research projects. Can you give us a bit of an introduction on the Lever project?
No, sure. Thanks so much, first of all, also for the presentations that we had today, and especially also the one about human rights, because this Lever project is also about human rights, specifically about a human rights-based approach. And why? Well, the human rights-based approach is a cross-cutting implementation framework for a variety of global agreements, such as the KMGBF and the Paris Agreement. And in that function, the approach needs to mediate between a variety of different values and interests, and it does a pretty good job at that. But it also faces challenges, especially due to its anthropocentric legacy, which perhaps at times might be at odds with the way non-anthropocentric worldviews value the non-human, right? In other words, how in situations where the boundaries between the human and the non-human is set in radically different ways, if at all, right? And this might hamper the effectiveness of HRBA. And I just want to add, because that's important, that it's not only about what is right now, but also about what we prevent from emerging if we keep on reproducing the same approach with the same ontological distinctions, right? And so this is a bit where we're situating. We try to develop and test a legal glossary that aims to enhance pluriversality for HRBA.
Okay.
In a minute.
Thanks a lot.
1.5.
Okay. Thanks a lot. That was a nutshell. Our last panelist is online. And thanks a lot, David, for joining us online. So David Goldsborough is a senior researcher and lecturer in coastal and marine governance at Van Gaal Lachenstein in the Netherlands. and he teaches marine spatial planning, water governance, and international conservation policy. So, David, can you give us a bit of a short introduction to Attitude, your project? I think we need the sound for David. Just a second, David, we don't hear you in the room. Not working? It worked well earlier. No? I promise we did some tests, huh? But... So I don't see a green light from our magicians on the technical aspects. Nope. Okay. Okay. David, hold on for a minute because we need a little bit of fine-tuning with the technical aspects. So I'll get started a bit in the panel, and then when they give me a green light, we'll include you, have a short presentation, and I will ask you a question like within the discussion we will have. Okay, I'm really sorry about that, David. No update on this side. Nope. Okay. Okay, well, let's get started and we'll catch up with David in a minute. So the idea of this panel is to give a bit of prospect from the project in relation to what we have discussed. And I think we wanted Maya maybe to have a bit of discussion on the transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches that are needed for transformative change, especially in relation to the discussion we had earlier with engaging with civil society actors as well. So if you want to give us a bit of your views from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. I might have two kind of reflections on that, going into a little bit two different directions. One is, we heard quite a bit in the previous panel, right, about the need to create kind of the spaces for these types of co-production to happen, and I think that's the same when we're talking about an interdisciplinary collaboration, as in a transdisciplinary collaboration, to create.
Can you speak up?
To create kind of a space in which we can reflect about differences of different views, of different understandings, and bring them into dialogue, but also live with the tensions that emerge. We're too often rushing towards integration or towards trying to find this holistic something. And don't give the space for these reflections and these kind of working productively across differences. And then reflecting on what that means actually for action. How can we take this pluralism and these plural understandings that can be radically different into our actions, basically. So that also relates to the experiential knowledge, right? And respecting other forms and bringing other forms of knowledge. I think that's equally relevant for co-production processes within science, even within Western science, as it is for co-production processes in transdisciplinary in other contexts. And I think we often kind of forget about that. So that would be one, and the other one would be more kind of in the direction which Tilman also was already alluding to, in the sense of working with perspectives that per se don't have these dichotomies that we find between natural and social, human and culture. And see where there are these perspectives from indigenous, but from process relation philosophies, from various, how can we work with those to basically, I don't know what interdisciplinarity then means in that context, but basically to go beyond dichotomies.
Okay. Maybe going to you, Tilman. You're coming from the international development world, and for a long time they have been using theory of change. They have been tackling the challenges of development. But what's your perspective of reconciling that with transformative change? What can be done differently?
Well, no, I mean, we're talking about the development work, right? Because So
and you can
I think
move on to transformative change.
So I think theories of change are a very useful tool, but at the same time, I think it's also okay to be, at times, to critically engage with that term. So from my experience, the way how in development work people engage with transformative change, it's through interventions such as projects or programs, right? And they're structured according to theories of change, which then articulate the contribution of an intervention to transformative change. And I personally have often been kind of puzzled with the way how change is conceptualized as part of those theories of change, in that perhaps I felt that it wasn't really adequate for the systems or for the properties of the systems that we're seeking to transform. Because those systems, the systems responsible for biodiversity laws, for climate change and whatnot, they're complex adaptive systems. But at times I think those theories of change did not really reflect that complexity. There's this distinction that you all know very well between complicated systems and complex systems. So a complicated system is like a car. It has many different elements that interact in complicated ways, but in the end, if you push a certain button, you know what will happen, right?
You can take it apart.
Exactly, and I think change is made very predictable, and you can control and manage for change. But this is not so much the case in complex systems, right, where we have emergence, novelty, right? And in the end, to me, this comes down actually not so much to theories of change or to properties of systems and whatnot, but to matters of, or to questions about accountability. So ideally, an intervention should be accountable to both, to those who finance it and who often value predictability and an absolute certainty about how funds are spent, and on the other hand, those that benefit from an intervention, and they often value flexibility, and to some extent there's a tension between those two. But then perhaps if we were to try to redefine accountability in a way to address that tension, that might help, right? And I'm talking about accountability away from how things have been defined up front. Sometimes 1 or 2 years, even before an intervention actually starts, towards being accountable to a process of implementation as it happens in real time. But I think for such a processual accountability to work, we need certain boundaries, because it also shouldn't be the case that everything goes. And I think this is perhaps somewhere, or a situation where also our project might contribute a bit to. So this project is about HRBA, a human rights-based approach, and this is the cross-cutting implementation framework of the KMGBF. So that means nothing else, that in the end that a corresponding intervention needs to comply with the requirements, the framework, or the boundaries in a certain sense of that approach, right? And so we're trying to enhance that by developing a pluriversal take on it. That is, in a certain sense, we're trying perhaps to broaden the boundaries, right, for interventions, then to have the necessary flexibility and their corresponding theories of change to adapt and evolve, and who knows, perhaps that might increase, on the one hand, the effectiveness of the intervention where it happens, and also at the same time it responds to the Global Convention agreement. So that's about theories of change. I just want to say that they're useful, right? But I think a lot is happening at the interface of theory and practice that many of us are doing, and I think there are a lot of interesting impulses to be made here.
Yeah, and it's a tool. It's not something that is an end by itself in terms of processes.
I wish people would hear you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I will come back also to you with the connection with this. How do you tackle the pluralism of worldviews when you are in these processes of trying to account for global biodiversity framework, for things that are framed into a certain type of worldview? So if you don't mind, because I think it's a tension as well.
Well, this is a bit the idea of you want to do that now or later, or?
Oh, you can tackle it a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we have David.
You can hear me.
I mean, also this is something that it's about tomorrow, because this is in the end what this project aims to achieve, right? Is to develop a legal glossary that can account for that plurality, right? And but which is at the same time compatible with the principles of a human rights-based approach.
So maybe we come back to that a bit later. If you don't mind, ladies, as we have David for this time, and I don't know how long he would last, David, can you very shortly introduce your project, Attitude, and maybe jump into some questions? The question I had, which was, in my opinion, related a bit to your project, was around the opportunities and barriers in the current legal and policy frameworks for the transformative change. So mixing together question and presentation.
Very good. I will do that straight away. So thank you for having me. I should have been in the room, but my health thought otherwise. So Attitude is all about restorative aquaculture to support biodiversity restoration. We will do science on natural science to talk about the evidence base and research that. We will look at socio-economic conditions, and we will do governance analysis. But at the heart of our project is 5 case studies in 5 countries. And we're doing these case studies as action research together with key stakeholders. And the emphasis of Attitude is on food security and nature restoration. And now to go on to your question. So the current legal and policy frameworks tend to focus on current and near future challenges within our leading worldview. And that was also discussed today by other speakers, with emphasis on economic growth. Fortunately, some legal frameworks, for example, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, they actually do have the required elements for a transformative change, a holistic approach. But achieving good environmental status, in the case of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, is way too open the way the legislation is now implemented. In the Attitude project, we will work with key stakeholders in the case study areas in Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain to create, and this is really important, a shared knowledge base for each case study and a shared understanding, agreement on where we are now with respect to bivalve aquaculture in vulnerable changing ecosystems. We then plan to jointly map out what a future looks like with restorative aquaculture as a contribution and cornerstone of resilient nature. This should lead or will lead to clear insights on opportunities and challenges, but also limitations of current legal and policy frameworks for the case studies. But it will also help us to develop a generic approach for other areas. This is the true case of multi-level governance, where we are working in case studies at a local arena and stage, but we will also involve national authorities and other stakeholders, and we will bring it into regional areas. So this interaction and interplay between the various levels of governance are really important. And I think what is key for me is that what we are doing in the project is science, policy, and practice together jointly. And I think that is a key element for transformative change. You do it together and you share the same knowledge base and accept that as being a valid system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for bearing with us and the technical issues as well. We'll come back to you also at the end with some more questions. I'd like to hear now from Annette and then Lol. But Annette, I think it's very interesting, the panel before what was brought to the table, because your project and your perspective is exactly looking into how do you take in consideration those pluralistic views, values, and also how do you engage with indigenous peoples' knowledge and actions.
Yeah, so we exchanged a lot of whispers and views in the panel before, and from our point of view, this could have been the last panel of the day, so everybody keeps it in their mind, your panel. And I try to answer in a way that it's meaningful. Hopefully, I really look forward to tomorrow to hear about all the projects, which we haven't yet had the glimpse into. But I hope it will be meaningful also in a way for some of your projects. I saw from the abstract book there are some projects with a lot of international case studies as well. Ours has 5 international case studies. They range from Brazil to Madagascar, Cook Islands, Indonesia to regions, and Taiwan. And they have the focus on local researchers, and the local researchers working with local NGOs, regional NGOs, and a variety of actors on the ground, using those ecosystems, living in those ecosystems for ages. So for me, the question that you were asking about pluralistic values and indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, and then juristic frameworks, for me, it was really interesting because I was like, whoa, okay, these are not parallel things. For me, they are not integrated either yet. They may not be able to be integrated, but they are related to each other a lot. And so for us in our project, spanning at least 8 different worlds in 3 years, based on partly very long-term relations with the partners on the ground, with our research colleagues, with their institutes, with the NGOs they have been collaborating with. This is in a way integrated, or we try over the next, to make it visible what relates, what connects us and what has been connecting us over the last 10 years, that the pluralistic values are the framework in which we act. There is this acknowledgement. There are different types of knowledges, different ways of epistemologies, how epistemologies are even looked at, are understood, how biodiversity is understood. So all these framings, we do this reflective exercise all the time, which sometimes takes our brain off our daily tasks. And as you say, it doesn't fit into any of the evaluation criteria often in research. So then you come to the indigenous and local knowledge part, which for us is the starting point, the core, the very essence of the Sketch project. If it would not be for this knowledge, our project would not exist. So it is about maybe not even mobilizing this knowledge, because in some places it is very mobile, but making it more visible as well. And then the juristic framework, or the juristic aspects, are part, from our perspective, are part of the pluralistic values in a way. I mean, if you look about distribution effects, participation, negotiation powers, there are so many aspects in that, and they are interwoven on all of the local research settings, and they've been part of the everyday work of all our colleagues on the ground. And there are but 3 countries, only basically France, Germany, where we're from, and Norway, who are sort of supporting the projects that are happening within the Sketch project over the next 3 years. And in a way, it's really humbling to be a coordinator here, and I have been reflecting the whole day on this, and because I'm allowed to listen for the next 3 years. I will not go there and do the research, but our local partners do the research, and they do this in 5 very different settings, and they have aspects of participatory action research as well. They have citizen science for participatory eDNA involved. They will be having cultural expositions sometimes on some of their features, what makes their social ecological keystone place which they selected, what makes it so special to them, and how do they see that carried by either international negotiations on national case studies. Is it showcased for a certain reason or not? All these kind of reflections. So I will be allowed to sort of wisdom catch over the next 3 years, feel very humbled, and to be able to be part of that and coordinate that in a way that also puts the different contexts from a very small island setting, small atoll, to a large coastal setting in the Brazilian Great Amazon Reef. to see how the stakeholders connect. And the only connecting thing is the methodology, that we try to have the same methodology from the onset in all the 5 areas. But yeah, so for me, short answer, it doesn't need to be integrated. It's already long connected. We're just really bad in seeing that connection.
Yeah, definitely. Lal, you want to complete a bit on this aspect of pluralistic values and also the connections with the policy in some ways, so that whatever you work on in the project doesn't stay in the closet, but is also impacting somewhere where this can also have some effect back in the policy and in the practice.
Yes, thank you so much, Estelle. Yeah, I think one of the take-home messages from the day today for me is really the breadth and existence actually of very comprehensive international policy tools to ensure the inclusion of pluralistic values, for instance, in projects and so on. So we talked a lot about the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and also the IPBES reports. And I think relevant to this discussion is the one actually published in 2022 I came across on diverse values and valuation of nature. And at the same time, also I see that on the science side, there's so much that is being done as well in generating this knowledge and making it available, also with global databases, the Environmental Justice Atlas. And yet this 2022 report from IPBES shows that less than 5% of the reviewed literature actually reports some sort of uptake from these pluralistic values into policy. So I think there's definitely more opportunity to improve this there. So I can talk about the Sketch project and how we aim to address this. I think really locating and aligning our research with the local context, local ecosystems, as diverse as they are, from mangroves to reefs, and the associated local governance context, and also both formal and informal, and the existing social organization. And so really designing the research and the research process in a way that aligns and reflects, yes, the very context-specific issues of biodiversity. And this is why we take this place-based approach. I also see, for instance, we are trying to provide evidence into policy design and options, as well exploring the potential of other effective area-based conservation measures, which is including in Target 3, I think, of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and trying to push actually for a greater inclusion of other than ecological focused and market-based valuations of nature, to include plural valuations, including spiritual and cultural, of course tailored to the local context. So, and finally also perhaps trying to provide pathways to actually moving from the description and identification of these social ecological keystone places into OECMs, but in a way that is tailored to the national policies, national policy framework, and somehow, to also link our results to those global conventions and guidelines. But I also see challenges, and of course the resources was also mentioned. We are working the Sketch project in countries in the Global South, and which actually host most of the biodiversity worldwide, as mentioned already. And the implementation of the guidelines are subject to political will and also government shifts, yes, which is a case in Latin America. And so, yes, I think I'll keep it to that. So, yeah, and these challenges actually may put at risk the longevity of the outcomes that we are aiming for.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also for bringing in the connections with other IPBES work that has been very impactful as well on values. Thanks a lot. I'm turning to the room. I know we are reaching a bit of a low energy level, especially the ones who have 2 hours time zone change. So just wanting to know if you have some reflections or questions to the panelists. Nope. Okay. Well, I see one question from Henrik.
Merci. So, as a marginalized hippie, but nevertheless a public servant or a civil servant, a lot of what I do, or I'm expected to do, in some way or other comes from the political level. And that's a not so small elephant right in the front of you there on the stage. Nobody talks about the politicians, the politics, and what decides the elections. Now there are several countries across Europe where things are being discussed, none of them being biodiversity. So maybe the question is rather for tomorrow when we're going to go through all the projects, but nevertheless I'll put it on the table now. How do we reach the politicians? How do we make this an issue? Even the climate is not an issue anymore. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Henrik. Actually, you very much the question I was going to ask at some point is, well, reality check with what's going on right now in the world in terms of geopolitics and in Europe in terms of politics. So, thanks, Henrik. How do you actually take that in consideration? What can be useful through your project to reach or impact on the political level? I see Annette is ready to answer.
I will not have a good answer on that one, on your last question. Maya, did you want to say something as well? I think it's just adding to that one sentence that came back and forth the entire day, is that we were talking also in the last panel, it was mentioned, when people actually lose the foundation of their lives, then they start becoming very aware, very active, and so on. We're close to that, but it seems it's still a lot of blindness around that is actually happening. And you had that lovely pyramid, right, with the biosphere on the ground. So this is the reality we live in. So how do I frame this not as as a question or answer or any of that? What I'm missing is still this, where's the connection to all the rest of the population? And I always include myself as a researcher, as part of the society. We are a society. When I talk to my family members, when I talk to, of course not the students, they have been all prompted already accordingly, but nobody knows about the CBD. Nobody knows about IPBES, apart from maybe the pollinator report it was mentioned, maybe, but only those who are really into really good gardening and so on. Or it was even on the Tagesschau, the German news, I think once. So that's the only outlet. So where is this, again, seeing this morning, how many people are involved in IPBES, how long it's been going on, how many assessments and how many case studies are treated. This is not aware to anybody in the normal public, and it doesn't matter which country we are talking about, Germany or whether we are talking about Fiji. And how can that be changed? And that will have a link to the politicians, because those are elected by those people, and those people including us. And I have been wondering, how, there have been so many rock stars. We all know in our work, in our careers, we've come across rock stars who have been pushing frontiers in not only research, but also in terms of courage, when to put the courage on the stage and when to say something against political will and so on. And this is part of the biodiversity activities that is not seen by anybody, and I would love that to change. I will not be able to change it for sure with one project, but I think that's a very strong call that is very necessary.
Thanks a lot, Annette. I see David, you wanted to add on this question?
Yes, for sure. I fully agree that this is the elephant in the room. I always try to address it. And I think what we are hoping to do in our project is to ensure by having industry included, NGOs, government, that they see a win-win situation where they are actually starting to talk about what is actually necessary, biodiversity change and climate change. Because end of the day, I agree with the speaker from the room. The key problem is if politicians are not talking about this and it's not in the news, then the general public doesn't know. And it's key that it is on the radar because our future depends on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yes, Maya?
I didn't want to say something, but I just wanted to link back to what we heard earlier about the social movements, right? To really think about the multiple actors in this game and also how agency is distributed across them. Maybe that brings us a bit forward. And then just keep engaging. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Maybe some final comments as well, Tinman?
Then maybe just related to that, if I may. No, I think one other way, I mean, okay, I'm not sure I get it like fully right, but I think it was in Davos that the Prime Minister of Canada had this much looked at speech where he was reflecting on the reduction of multilateralism and rule-based order and whatnot, but then he also talked, okay, that means that we all have to become more resilient, right? And I think like one way to get the attention of politicians might then be, well, we have to co-opt that term so we can, and show how in what way the resilience depends on the one hand and is enhanced by rule-based approaches, right? So I think it's actively, like aggressively engaging with those speeches and turning them to our advantage in a certain sense.
Indeed. Some final comment, Lol, do you want to add something or?
I kind of had the same thoughts as Maya, and yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to know if you wanted to add anything from your perspective on what has been discussed through the day before we close the panel. It's quite, we're all very tired, I think, at this point. Oh, I see some questions. Yes, we have some questions. Yes, Amanda.
Hi, yeah, I was, first comment was I'm very glad to hear that there's a project on the human rights-based approach, and I'd love to have a chat with you about our methodology and whether or not it could be helpful at all. But it just struck me with all of the projects that you've shown this afternoon, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the processes that they're following that are human rights-based, actually participative, inclusive, involving local communities. And I'm on the governing board of Water for All, which is a similar partnership. One of the projects, activities that we do there, and I don't know if you do the same, is to bring projects of like minds together on a regular basis to share their results and to try and work together a little bit. And I wondered whether that might be happening or if that's something that could be useful.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'll take the other question so we can answer both questions together. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, this is more of a question I wanted to ask earlier on as well. It's more of a reflexive, well, anyway. It feels like we're talking about all these topics from like an outsider view, and it feels like we tend to separate ourselves from what's happening. So here comes my following question is like, would you consider us actors of transformative change? If yes, why? And if no, why? Okay. That's sort of, maybe it's difficult to answer, but...
So that's a tough question to finish. But maybe on the question of mutualizing around the projects working on human rights-based, like Amanda was saying, is there any ideas of bringing together all the different projects working on that?
I think there's always a certain incentive and intention by Biodiversa for us to link among each other. I mean, that's part of the reasons, I think, for these meetings as well. And hopefully, I mean, once we all separate again and we are in our flights and we're back into our deep knowledge swamps, yes, I think it would, since yesterday follow you on LinkedIn, so it was the first time I heard about that institution too. It would be lovely to have that. I already thought also of finally inviting colleagues from the Stockholm Resilience Center, so colleagues where we have the opportunity to regionally, without spending millions of euros, inviting researchers to exchange and fill this 1 day or 2 day to exchange and see how we can align and come up with at least lessons learned of what does not work and why, in which context.
Okay, thank you. And on the tough questions on are we, researchers here and policymakers, actors of change, of transformative change or not, and why? Who wants to jump?
Yes, I already have the mic. No. I'm happy to leave the first answer, but I can also have the first answer. So in a way, yes and no. In German, we have a lovely word, Jein, which combines both. Of course, I think it's part of the idea behind the BiodivTransform call to have everyone working in all these projects be agents of change. It's an interesting discussion we have with our various local research partners as well. Who is an agent of change? Do they actually see themselves as agents of change? When we have local university staff fighting against funding cuts and not being able to lecture the next cohort of master students, so to be cut the ability to be an agent of change and so on. So of course, I think all of us can be. We are not always allowed to be. In which ways we are not allowed to define ourselves sometimes. But maybe through certain shortcuts and pathways, we can still be agents of change.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're always part of the systems we want to change, right? So it's hard not to be at least part of it. I would wish my research was always contributing to change in some way or collaborating with change makers, but at least I feel like I need to reflect on what my research does and how it affects the world. And how also be very aware of how we might, through the way how we do research in traditional, or whatever you want to name it, ways, might reinforce unintentionally some of the dynamics that are actually creating the crisis we're in. So I do think we can't really evade that question. We're always part of it in some way.
Can I jump in here? Yeah, so just to bring in a bit of my research experience during my PhD in northern Brazil, where I was doing my research, there was a lot of research fatigue, so people really complaining and tired actually of being surveyed, interviewed and so on. Because of extractive research practices, I think that really remain strongly, and I think this talks about still systems of dominance of certain knowledge systems, as was already mentioned in the previous panel, and I think there's also increasingly exercises of reflexivity and understanding where we are talking from and what's our position, or in Portuguese there's an expression that says your place of speech somehow, and I think there we can see ourselves importantly as agents of change when we reflect on how we are engaging. And actually beyond research, but also really constructing relationships with the people. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Tilman, final comment? No. David, do you want to have a final comment on this question of being an agent of change as part of?
I certainly do. I always work with stakeholders in my project. Including decision makers, but we need to be aware that decision makers, if for instance decision makers represent local communities or smaller areas, they sometimes have very little influence on larger scale processes. So I have seen stakeholder fatigue not based on being involved in a process, but as stakeholders and decision makers not being able to reach the real stakeholders that make the decisions at a national level. So it's very complex. And this has to do with this concept of multi-level governance. Who is in control? And I think this is really important for transformative change to work. The real decision makers with the power need to be at the table, and they need to acknowledge other stakeholders at all levels. And that's really a challenge, but that's a challenge that we need to meet. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, David. Well, we are closing now this panel. I would like to thank all of you for contributions and for engaging even late in the day with this discussion. And of course, tomorrow we'll have more. The researchers in the projects will have more time to present and exchange as well. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you. We're reaching the end of this Science Policy Forum, and I think, Osman, you wanted to give a few reflections. Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe introduce yourself again, even if everyone has had emails from you.
Yes,
Osman.
gladly. Yeah, I think several of you have received the emails from me, and my colleague Malis, she did an excellent job throughout the process. And I had some notes that longs for 3 pages that tries to summarize all the key messages from the presentations in a nutshell. But I think the level of energy in the room reached a really good equilibrium, so we should keep it here. And so I will keep that one short, but my intention is to basically do a kind of a wrap-up of the day. And I think the key message that we all of our ears got familiar with today was that transformative change is no longer optional. I think it's a bold statement maybe, but it's urgent, necessary, and deeply challenging. But the good thing is that there are clear signs that it can be possible, although there's a long way to go. But I think at the end of the day, we should keep our optimism and do our best. And the second key message could be summarized as there is no single pathway or solution. Thus, alignment and synergy matters for sure, and that would include engagement of everyone. And equity, justice, and inclusion are not negotiable in this process if we want this transformative change is to be persistent and progressive. That was the third key message, I guess, from the day. And last but not the least, I think everyone has a role to play in the structure, from policymakers. We said it's not really easy to attract them. They have higher agendas nowadays, but we still shouldn't give up trying. And researchers, of course, they are one of the key actors in this process. Communities, and I think especially during this first panel today, the role of local communities, indigenous communities, has been really underlined strongly, and these are not just supplementary components of this process, but the key actors all along the way. They should definitely not be neglected and even more empowered. The financial actors and the sector itself needs a huge transition, and I think degrowth, as Cengiz very rightly put forward, degrowth is not a myth or just a fancy concept anymore, but I think the reality that all the financial actors should embrace soon enough. Basically, we need to align our systems, values, and actions quickly enough to make it happen together. So this was it as the key messages. And before closing, I would like to take the opportunity once again to warmly thank you, all of you, the participants, both on site and online, our speakers for their valuable contributions and active engagement. FRCT, obviously, our host agency, to invite and welcome us in this beautiful island. The Biodiversa Plus organizational team for making this happen, and of course our moderator Estelle Balain for her excellent moderation throughout the day. And here I will stop, but maybe just few quick reminders. So a very nice social dinner is waiting for all of us, at 7 p.m. at the restaurant that we had the lunch. And the excitement will continue, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of the program. Tomorrow we have the kickoff meeting starting at 9:30, and the other day we have the clustering workshop for the first half of the day. And that's it. Thank you once again for being here, and we are looking forward to meeting with you again next year. Thank you.